Subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab for more original and exclusive stories. We hope you enjoy this one. Let's begin. Ethan Blackwood's fingers drummed an impatient rhythm on the steering wheel of his Audi R8 as he navigated the congested downtown streets. The sleek sports car, usually a source of pride, felt like a gilded cage in the stop-and-go traffic. His mind raced, consumed by the forgotten wallet that threatened to derail his $1 million proposal presentation. "Damn it," he muttered, glancing at his empty breast pocket for the 100th time. The thought of asking Victoria to bring it down to his office made him wince. He could already hear her sardonic comments about his absent-mindedness. With a sudden jerk of the wheel, Ethan cut across 2 lanes of honking traffic, ignoring the chorus of blaring horns. He'd grab the wallet himself and be back on the road in 10 minutes. No need to give Victoria more ammunition for her little jabs. As he pulled into the private parking area of his luxurious penthouse, Ethan's eyes narrowed at the unfamiliar Porsche 911 parked haphazardly nearby. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he approached their door, an unsettling silence greeting him as he entered. "Victoria," he called out, his voice echoing in the vast open-plan living area. No response. The muffled sounds coming from the master bedroom sent a chill down his spine. Ethan's hand hesitated on the doorknob for a split second before he pushed it open. The sight that greeted him sent his world spinning off its axis. A shirtless man, tall and muscular, stood by the bed, carelessly buttoning his pants. His dark hair was mussed, his chiseled features twisted in surprise, and something that looked unsettlingly like amusement. Rage exploded in Ethan's chest. He lunged forward, grabbing the stranger by the collar. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling with fury. Before the man could answer, a flash of silk caught Ethan's peripheral vision. Victoria rushed out of the ensuite bathroom, cinching a robe around her waist. Her face cycled through shock, defiance, and finally settled on a look of cold detachment that chilled Ethan to his core. "Let him go, Ethan," she said, her voice steady and devoid of any guilt or shame. "This is Xavier Thornton, my new love." Ethan's grip on Xavier's collar loosened, more from shock than compliance. He stumbled back a step, his mind reeling as he tried to process the surreal scene before him. "What was I to you for 13 years, Victoria?" The words tumbled out before he could stop them, raw and vulnerable. Victoria's lips curled into a cruel smile that Ethan had never seen before. It transformed her beautiful face into something alien and malevolent. "A tool, Ethan," she replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "Just a surviving tool. Xavier here is everything you're not, passionate, spontaneous, and exciting." Each word was a dagger, precisely aimed to inflict maximum pain. Ethan felt his chest constrict, struggling to draw breath as the full weight of her betrayal crashed down upon him. Fury coursing through his veins, Ethan ordered them both out of his house. As Victoria gathered her things, she hissed, "I'll make sure you regret this decision, Ethan. You have no idea what I'm capable of." The threat hung in the air as Victoria and Xavier left, the sound of the Porsche's engine fading into the distance. Ethan stood alone in the bedroom, his world shattered around him. The following days passed in a blur for Ethan. He moved through the prestigious architecture firm like a ghost, going through the motions but feeling utterly disconnected. Every sympathetic glance, every hushed conversation that stopped abruptly when he entered a room, felt like salt in his still raw wounds. It was during a particularly grueling meeting that Marcus Steele, Ethan's colleague and best friend at the firm, finally confronted him. As the other partners filed out of the conference room, Marcus hung back, concern etched deep in the lines of his face. "Ethan, what's going on with you, man?" Marcus asked, his voice low and urgent. "You've been off your game all week. That proposal you presented just now, it's not up to your usual standards. Talk to me." Ethan looked up at his friend, seeing the genuine worry in his eyes. The weight of his secret was crushing him, and Marcus's concern finally cracked his resolve. "It's Victoria," Ethan said, his voice barely above a whisper. She's been cheating on me. I walked in on them, Marcus, in our bed." Marcus's eyes widened in shock, then narrowed in anger. Jesus, Ethan, I'm so sorry. What are you going to do? As Ethan confided in Marcus, detailing Victoria's threats and his fears, neither man noticed the intern hovering nearby, her eyes wide with interest. By the end of the day, the entire firm would be buzzing with whispers about Ethan Blackwood's scandalous divorce. Meanwhile, Victoria and Xavier began their campaign of harassment against Ethan. They spread malicious rumors in their social circle, claiming Ethan was abusive and controlling. Victoria reached out to Ethan's clients, attempting to tarnish his professional reputation with false accusations. The attacks came from all sides, leaving Ethan reeling. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from concerned friends and colleagues, asking about the rumors. Clients called, demanding explanations for accusations they'd heard. Ethan found himself constantly on the defensive, struggling to maintain his composure and his reputation. As the pressure mounted, Ethan felt increasingly cornered and desperate. The final straw came when he received a call from his bank. Victoria had drained their joint accounts, leaving him nearly penniless. This last betrayal ignited a fierce desire for revenge within Ethan. He realized that playing defense wasn't enough. He needed to fight back. With renewed determination, Ethan reached out to his old college friend, Olivia Chun, now a private investigator. They met at a quiet cafe, away from prying eyes. "Olivia, I need your help," Ethan said, his voice low and urgent. "I need you to dig into Victoria and Xavier's backgrounds. There has to be something I can use against them." Olivia studied him carefully, noting the dark circles under his eyes and the tension in his jaw. "This isn't like you, Ethan." Ethan's eyes hardened. "They've left me no choice, Liv. Victoria's trying to destroy everything I've built. I need to protect myself." Olivia nodded slowly. "All right, I'll see what I can find. But Ethan, be careful. Revenge can be a double-edged sword." As Olivia began her investigation, Ethan felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since his world had imploded. He didn't know what Olivia would uncover, but he was certain of one thing. He wouldn't go down without a fight. The spark of revenge had been ignited, and Ethan was ready to fan it into a roaring flame. Olivia Chun sat in her dimly lit office, surrounded by stacks of files and the soft glow of multiple computer screens. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, eyes darting between documents as she pieced together the puzzle of Victoria Blackwood and Xavier Thornton's lives. The deeper she dug, the more her brow furrowed. This was no simple case of infidelity. It was a tangled web of deceit that stretched back years. Her phone buzzed. Ethan's name flashed on the screen. "What have you found?" His voice was taut with barely contained tension. Olivia leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes. "You might want to sit down for this, Ethan. It's not good." She heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Just tell me, Liv." "All right," she said, pulling up a series of documents on her main screen. "Let's start with your wife's lover. Xavier Thornton? That's not his real name. He's actually Xavier Reeves, a known con artist. He's got a history of seducing wealthy women and swindling them out of their money. He's been operating under the radar for years, always managing to stay one step ahead of the law." Ethan's silence was deafening. Olivia continued, her voice softening slightly. "And Victoria, I'm sorry, Ethan, but she's not who you thought she was either. I've uncovered a pattern of infidelity going back at least 5 years. But that's not the worst of it. She's been involved in several fraudulent business dealings. Shell companies, embezzlement, the works." "Jesus Christ," Ethan muttered. How? How did I not see any of this?" Olivia's heart ached for her friend. "These people are professionals, Ethan. They're experts at hiding their tracks. But now we know, and that gives us an advantage." There was a long pause before Ethan spoke again, his voice hardening with resolve. "You're right. Knowledge is power. Send me everything you've got. It's time to fight back." As Olivia compiled her findings into a secure file, her mind raced with the implications. This wasn't just about helping a friend anymore. They were dealing with dangerous criminals. She made a mental note to beef up her own security measures. If Victoria and Xavier got wind of her investigation, things could get ugly fast. Across town, Ethan sat in his sparsely furnished apartment, staring at the laptop screen as Olivia's report populated with document after damning document. Each new revelation felt like a physical blow, but with each hit, his resolve strengthened. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Liam Blackwood, his tech-savvy cousin. If anyone could help him gather the electronic evidence needed to bring Victoria and Xavier down, it was Liam. The phone rang twice before a cheerful voice answered. "Ethan, long time no hear, cuz." "What's up?" Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. "Liam, I need your help. It's bad. Really bad." The cheerfulness drained from Liam's voice, replaced by concern. "What's going on, Ethan? I can't explain everything over the phone. Can you come over? And bring your gear. We've got some digital digging to do." There was a pause. Then Liam's voice came back, firm and determined. "I'm on my way. Hang tight, cuz. Whatever this is, we'll figure it out together." As Ethan ended the call, he felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in weeks. With Olivia's investigative skills and Liam's technical expertise, they had a fighting chance. Victoria and Xavier had no idea what was coming for them. He turned back to the laptop, steeling himself to dive deeper into the sordid details of his wife's double life. Each revelation stoked the fire of his determination. They wanted to play dirty? Fine. He'd show them just how dirty he could get. The following weeks saw Ethan Blackwood undergo a transformation to the outside world. He appeared a broken man, stumbling through his days in a haze of despair. His colleagues at the architecture firm whispered behind his back, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. But behind closed doors, a different Ethan emerged. With Liam hunched over multiple laptops and Olivia poring over stacks of documents, Ethan's apartment had become a war room. The walls were covered with timelines, connections, and strategies, all aimed at one goal: bringing Victoria and Xavier to justice. "We need to lure them into a false sense of security," Ethan mused, pacing the length of the living room. "Make them think they've won completely." Liam looked up from his screen, eyebrows raised. "You sure about that, cuz? It's gonna mean taking some hits to your reputation." Ethan's jaw clenched. "My reputation's already in tatters thanks to their smear campaign. At least this way, it serves a purpose." Olivia nodded approvingly. "It's a smart play. If they think you're defeated, they might get sloppy, make mistakes." And so, Operation Broken Man began. Ethan started showing up to work disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed as if from crying or drinking. He fumbled presentations, missed deadlines, and generally gave the impression of a man on the verge of a complete breakdown. The whispers in the office grew louder. "Poor Ethan," they'd say. "He's really lost it since Victoria left him." Meanwhile, Victoria and Xavier reveled in their apparent victory. They were spotted at high-end restaurants, luxury boutiques, and exclusive clubs, spending Ethan's money with reckless abandon. Their laughter echoed through the social circles they once shared with Ethan, each public appearance another twist of the knife. But Ethan wasn't as broken as he appeared. Every night he, Liam, and Olivia worked tirelessly, building their case piece by piece. Liam's technical wizardry uncovered a trail of digital breadcrumbs linking Victoria and Xavier to their fraudulent activities. Olivia's network of contacts provided crucial pieces of the puzzle, filling in gaps and corroborating evidence. As their case grew stronger, Ethan realized they needed more. Victims' testimonies could be the nail in the coffin for Victoria and Xavier's operations. With Olivia's help, he began reaching out to those who had fallen prey to the duo's schemes. One name stood out: Sofia Alvarez, Victoria's former business partner. Ethan remembered her vaguely from cocktail parties and charity events, always standing slightly apart from the crowd, her eyes sharp and assessing. He'd always assumed she and Victoria had simply had a falling out. Now, he suspected there was much more to the story. Arranging a meeting with Sophia proved challenging. She was understandably wary, having been burned by Victoria before. But Ethan's persistence paid off, and she finally agreed to meet him at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Sophia arrived precisely on time, her posture rigid and her eyes guarded. She slid into the booth across from Ethan, studying him carefully. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice cool and measured. "I must admit, I was surprised to hear from you. What exactly is it you want from me?" Ethan leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. "The truth, Ms. Alvarez. About Victoria. About what really happened between you two." Sophia's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of pain crossing her face before she schooled her features back into neutrality. "And why should I dredge up ancient history? What's done is done." "Because it's not ancient history," Ethan replied, sliding a folder across the table. "It's happening again. Victoria and her new partner, Xavier, are running the same schemes. They've already hurt people. They'll keep hurting people unless we stop them." Sophia's hand trembled slightly as she opened the folder, her eyes scanning the documents within. With each page she turned, her composure cracked a little more. Finally, she looked up at Ethan, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I always wondered if I was the only one," she whispered. "If I was just weak, stupid." Ethan reached across the table, gently squeezing her hand. "You weren't weak or stupid, Sophia. You were a victim. But now, you have the power to make sure there are no more victims. Will you help us?" Sophia took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. When she met Ethan's gaze again, there was steel in her eyes. "Tell me what you need me to do." As Ethan left the cafe, Sophia's agreement to testify secure, he felt a surge of triumph. The trap was set. Now, it was time to spring it. The early morning stillness was shattered by the insistent buzzing of a phone. Special Agent Sarah Donovan fumbled for her cell, squinting at the bright screen. An anonymous tip. Another dead end, probably, but in her line of work, you never knew when a seemingly insignificant lead might crack a case wide open. As she listened to the distorted voice on the other end of the line, her eyes widened. Names, dates, account numbers. Whoever this was, they had serious intel. By the time the call ended, Sarah was wide awake, her mind racing with possibilities. "Johnson," she barked, striding into the office an hour later. "I need everything we got on a Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Xavier Thornton, and get me a liaison at the SEC. We might have a big one on our hands." Across town, Ethan Blackwood sat in his car, heart pounding as he ended the call. The burner phone felt heavy in his hand as he tossed it into the passenger seat. There was no going back now. He had just set in motion a chain of events that would either save him or destroy him completely. His phone buzzed his real phone this time. A message from Liam. Package delivered to SC. Ball's in their court now. Ethan allowed himself a smile. Victoria and Xavier had no idea what was about to hit them. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. FBI agents combed through financial records, following the trail of breadcrumbs Ethan and his team had carefully laid out. SEC investigators pored over Victoria's business dealings, uncovering layers of fraud and deceit. Victoria, meanwhile, was beginning to sense that something was amiss. Her carefully crafted world was showing cracks, and she didn't like it one bit. She paced her luxury apartment, phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what it takes," she hissed into the receiver. "Find out who's been digging into our affairs and shut them down. Now." But it was too late. The walls were already closing in, and Victoria's desperate attempts to plug the leaks only served to draw more attention to her activities. As the pressure mounted, Victoria made a fatal mistake. In a moment of panic, she attempted to blackmail Ethan with fabricated evidence of misconduct. It was a desperate ploy, a last-ditch effort to regain control of the situation. What Victoria didn't know was that Liam had been working tirelessly to secure Ethan's digital footprint. Every email, every text message, every financial transaction, all of it was backed up and verified. Her clumsy attempt at blackmail fell flat. serving only to add another charge to the growing list of her crimes. Ethan received Victoria's blackmail attempt with a mixture of anger and satisfaction. Anger at her audacity, at the depths of her betrayal, but satisfaction, too, because this was the final piece of the puzzle. With this, they had her dead to rights. He forwarded the blackmail attempt to Agent Donovan, along with Liam's evidence proving its fabrication. Then, he sat back and waited for the hammer to fall. He didn't have to wait long. The next morning, as Ethan sipped his coffee and pretended to review blueprints at work, all hell broke loose. News alerts began popping up on his phone. Prominent businesswoman Victoria Blackwood implicated in massive fraud scheme. Con artist Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Thornton, wanted by FBI. SEC launches investigation into Blackwood Enterprises. Ethan's colleagues gathered around the break room TV, watching in shock as Victoria's face flashed across the screen, followed by Xavier's. The newscaster's voice was hard as she detailed the charges: fraud, embezzlement, money laundering, and more. Marcus appeared at Ethan's side, his face a mask of concern. "Ethan, man, did you know about any of this?" Ethan allowed his mask to slip just a little. He let Marcus see a glimpse of the pain, the anger, the satisfaction. "I had my suspicions," he said quietly, "but I never imagined it went this deep." As his co-workers buzzed with shock and speculation, Ethan slipped away to the restroom. He locked himself in a stall, took a deep breath, and allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. They'd done it. The trap had sprung, and Victoria and Xavier were caught right in the middle of it. But Ethan knew better than to celebrate too early. This was just the beginning. Victoria and Xavier were cornered animals now, and there was no telling what they might do in their desperation to escape. As he splashed water on his face, steeling himself for the media frenzy that was sure to follow, Ethan made a silent vow. He would see this through to the end, no matter what it took. Victoria and Xavier had tried to destroy him. Now, they would learn the true meaning of destruction. Xavier Reeves, a.k.a. Xavier Thornton, sat in the first-class lounge of JFK International Airport, his leg bouncing nervously as he checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign that his hastily laid plans were about to unravel. The burner phone in his pocket buzzed. He fished it out with trembling hands, his heart rate spiking as he read the message from his contact. FBI en route. ETA 10 minutes. Get out now. Shit, Xavier muttered, shoving the phone back in his pocket and grabbing his carry-on. He'd known the walls were closing in, but he hadn't expected them to move this fast. He should have left days ago, but the promise of one last big score had been too tempting to resist. As he strode towards the exit, a flash of red caught his eye. A breaking news cheering scrolled across the bottom of a nearby TV screen. Prominent businesswoman Victoria Blackwood implicated in massive fraud scheme. Xavier froze, his blood running cold. If they had Victoria, it was only a matter of time before she gave him up. Self-preservation had always been her strongest trait. With renewed urgency, he quickened his pace, mind racing as he formulated a new escape plan. He'd need cash, a new identity, maybe a boat to slip out of the country undetected. But first, he had to get out of this damn airport. As Xavier pushed through the revolving doors into the humid New York night, he allowed himself a moment of bitter reflection. Victoria had been a means to an end, nothing more. A convenient mark with deep pockets and useful connections. But in his haste to cut and run, he'd left her to face the music alone. It wasn't personal. It was just business. Across town, Victoria Blackwood paced the polished floors of her penthouse apartment, a glass of scotch clutched in her manicured hand. The TV blared in the background, endlessly repeating the story of her downfall. "This is impossible," she muttered, taking another gulp of the amber liquid. "I cover my tracks. We covered our tracks." But the evidence scrolling across the screen told a different story. Bank records, witness testimonies, surveillance footage. It was all there, laid bare for the world to see. Her carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and Victoria found herself facing a terrifying reality. For the first time in her life, she was truly alone. Her phone had been ringing nonstop for hours. Lawyers, business associates, so-called friends, all wanting answers she couldn't provide. She'd stopped answering after the third call, unable to bear the thinly veiled accusations and hasty distancing. As the scotch burned its way down her throat, Victoria's thoughts turned to Xavier. Where was he? Why hadn't he contacted her? A cold dread settled in her stomach as she realized the truth. He'd abandoned her, just like she'd abandoned Ethan. Ethan, the name sent a jolt through her system. In all the chaos, she'd almost forgotten about her soon-to-be ex-husband. A desperate plan began to form in her mind. If anyone could help her out of this mess, it was Ethan. He'd always been the steady one, the fixer. Surely, if she appealed to their history, the love they'd once shared. With shaking hands, Victoria reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts until she found Ethan's name, her thumb hovering over the call button. Taking a deep breath, she pressed it, bringing the phone to her ear. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Victoria. Ethan's voice was cold, devoid of any emotion. Ethan, thank God. Victoria breathed, relief flooding her system. I need your help. It's all falling apart, and I don't know what to do. Please. I know I hurt you, but no. The single word cut through her rambling like a knife. What? Victoria asked, thrown off balance by the flat refusal. I said no, Victoria, Ethan repeated, his voice hard as steel. You made your choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. But Ethan, please, Victoria pleaded, desperation creeping into her voice. We were married for 13 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, Victoria dared to hope. Then Ethan spoke again, his words dripping with contempt. It meant everything to me, Victoria. But I was just a tool to you, remember? Well, this tool is done fixing your messes. Goodbye. The line went dead, leaving Victoria staring at her phone in disbelief. She'd always prided herself on her ability to manipulate people, to bend them to her will. But Ethan had changed. The man she'd just spoken to was a stranger, cold, unyielding, and completely beyond her reach. As the reality of her situation sank in, Victoria felt the last vestiges of her composure crumble. She sank to the floor, the empty Scotch glass rolling away as sobs racked her body. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. The courtroom buzzed with nervous energy as the bailiff called for order. Journalists scrambled for prime positions, their pens poised over notepads, eager to capture every detail of what promised to be the trial of the decade. At the defense table, Xavier Reeves and Victoria Blackwood sat side by side, a study in contrasts. Xavier exuded an air of casual indifference, his handsome features arranged in a mask of bored contempt. Victoria, on the other hand, was a tightly wound spring, her eyes darting nervously around the room as she smoothed non-existent wrinkles from her designer suit. As the judge entered and the court was called to session, a hush fell over the room. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, approached the bench. Your Honor, the state calls Ethan Blackwood to the stand. A ripple of excitement passed through the spectators as Ethan made his way to the witness box. He cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit, his face a study in calm determination. As he raised his right hand to be sworn in, his eyes briefly met Victoria's. She flinched at the cold steel she saw there, quickly averting her gaze. The prosecutor began her questioning, leading Ethan through the sordid details of Victoria and Xavier's schemes. With each response, Ethan's voice grew stronger, more assured. He painted a vivid picture of betrayal, fraud, and callous disregard for the lives they'd ruined. From her seat at the defense table, Victoria watched in growing horror as Ethan systematically dismantled the life she'd built. Every lie, every manipulation, every fraudulent deal. He laid them all bare, backed by a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Xavier, for his part, maintained his facade of indifference. But those who looked closely might have noticed the slight tremor in his hands, the sheen of sweat on his upper lip. As Ethan's testimony continued, Xavier's eyes darted more and more frequently to the exits, like a cornered animal seeking escape. When it came time for cross-examination, Victoria and Xavier's high-priced defense attorney did his best to poke holes in Ethan's story. But Ethan remained unflappable, his responses measured and precise. For every attempted gotcha, Ethan had a ready answer, often supported by additional evidence that only served to further incriminate the defendants. As the defense attorney returned to his seat, defeat evident in the slump of his shoulders, the prosecutor called her next witness, Sofia Alvarez. Victoria's head snapped up at the name, her eyes widening in shock as her former business partner took the stand. Sofia's testimony was damning, providing intimate details of Victoria's fraudulent business practices and manipulative personality. "She told me it was just creative accounting," Sofia said, her voice thick with emotion. "By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. She'd set me up to take the fall if anything went wrong." As Sofia's testimony continued, Victoria felt the last threads of her defense unraveling. She leaned over to her lawyer, whispering urgently. The attorney frowned, shaking his head, but Victoria persisted. Finally, the attorney stood. "Your Honor, my client wishes to address the court." The judge raised an eyebrow but nodded his assent. Victoria stood, smoothing her skirt with trembling hands. I'd like to make a deal," she said, her voice quavering. "I have information about Xavier, about others involved in our operations. I'm willing to testify, to tell you everything I know." Xavier's head whipped around, his eyes blazing with fury. "You treacherous bitch," he snarled, lunging towards Victoria. The bailiffs rushed to restrain him as chaos erupted in the courtroom. As Xavier was dragged away, hurling threats and obscenities, Victoria locked eyes with Ethan once more. This time, she saw something flicker behind the steely exterior. Not sympathy or forgiveness, but a satisfaction. In that moment, Victoria realized the full extent of her fall. She'd lost everything: her wealth, her status, her freedom. But worst of all, she'd lost the one person who had truly loved her, and there was no going back. The sun was setting over the city skyline, painting the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. Ethan Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office, a glass of champagne in hand, watching the play of light on the gleaming skyscrapers. Behind him, the sounds of celebration filled the room. Laughter, the clink of glasses, excited chatter. His team had just landed the biggest contract in the firm's history, a prestigious international project that would put them on the map in a whole new way. "There's the man of the hour." Marcus's booming voice cut through the noise as he approached, clapping Ethan on the shoulder. "How does it feel to be on top of the world, my friend?" Ethan turned, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "It feels pretty damn good, Marcus. We've come a long way." Marcus nodded, his expression growing serious for a moment. "We have indeed. There were times I wasn't sure you'd make it through after. Well, you know." Ethan's mind flashed back to those dark days after Victoria's betrayal, the struggle to keep his head above water as his personal and professional life threatened to implode. He remembered the unwavering support of friends like Marcus, the dogged determination of Olivia as she helped uncover the truth, the technical wizardry of Liam that had been instrumental in bringing Victoria and Xavier to justice. "I couldn't have done it without all of you," Ethan said, raising his glass in a toast. "To friends who become family, and to new beginnings." As if on cue, Olivia appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. "What are we toasting to?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. Ethan pulled her close, planting a soft kiss on her forehead. "To us," he said simply. "To surviving the storm and coming out stronger on the other side." Olivia's smile widened, a mix of pride and love shining in her eyes. What had started as a professional collaboration during the investigation had blossomed into something neither of them had expected. In Olivia, Ethan had found not just a partner, but a true equal. Someone who challenged him, supported him, and understood him in a way Victoria never had. As the party continued around them, Ethan found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The pain of betrayal, the thirst for revenge, the long nights spent building a case against those who had wronged him. It all seemed like a lifetime ago. Victoria and Xavier were serving long prison sentences, their empire of lies and fraud dismantled. The victims of their schemes, including Sofia Alvarez, had received restitution and a measure of justice. And Ethan had emerged from the crucible stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of the true riches in his life. "Penny for your thoughts?" Olivia asked, squeezing his hand gently. Ethan shook his head, chuckling softly, just thinking about how sometimes the best revenge is living well. Olivia nodded, understanding flashing in her eyes. "And are you?" "Living well, I mean." Ethan looked around the room, taking in the faces of his friends and colleagues. His gaze settled on Olivia, and he felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the champagne. "You know what?" he said, pulling her closer. "I really am." As the celebration continued into the night, Ethan allowed himself to fully embrace the moment. The past was behind him, the future bright with promise. He had weathered the storm, faced his demons, and come out the other side not just intact, but triumphant. In the end, Victoria's cruel words had proven prophetic, though not in the way she had intended. Ethan had indeed been a tool for justice, for redemption, and ultimately for his own salvation. And as he raised his glass one more time, surrounded by the people who truly mattered, Ethan Blackwood knew that he had finally found the passion, spontaneity, and excitement that had been missing from his life for far too long. The city lights twinkled below, a testament to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. And Ethan was ready to embrace them all, one triumphant step at a time. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Hello? I'm a man in my mid-30s. I'm reminded of a story from my early 20s. I had a close friend during my adolescence. We were in the same class throughout middle school and graduated from the same high school. I'm going to share a secret story about that friend. We became desk mates in middle school. I didn't know at first, but I later found out that his father wasn't around. My friend was always cheerful and bright. He was an average student in our class. I also had similar grades. We got along well in terms of personality. We visited each other's houses, and his house was much nicer than ours. I remember the first time I went to his house. There were family photos in the living room, and noticeably many photos of his father in the master bedroom. His father's smiling face looked really nice. My father is a quiet type who doesn't express his affection much. I asked my friend about his relationship with his father. He said, "I don't have a father." I was taken aback. No father? Living alone with his mother at such a young age? It struck me as odd. My friend briefly mentioned that his father had passed away in an accident. His mother was quite a beauty, tall and slim. She was quite different from my mother. As I was looking around the house, his mother brought me a sandwich and juice. My mother is a bit rough around the edges, but his mother seemed kind and dignified. Sitting in the living room, she asked me various questions and hoped that we could remain good friends. By the way, I heard that she gave science tutoring at home. If I had any questions while studying, she told me to mark them and ask her when I visited. I said okay. I had a great time at my friend's house that day. When I got home, I told my mother about it. I told her, "Mom, I've been getting along with a friend recently, and his mom does science tutoring at home. She said I could ask her anything if I don't understand." My mother said, "Really? She's a kind woman. Take this opportunity to try to get into the top tier." After that day, my friend and I made a plan. We decided to take studying seriously. We agreed to stay away from our phones, attend cram school diligently, and take short breaks on weekends to clear our heads. Our grades started to improve little by little, and we were capable of applying to a high school known for its academic excellence. However, students who were much better at studying than us were accepted. We were assigned to a high school near our homes and began our grueling study journey. As adults say, it's hard to improve your grades in high school. We studied with all our might. Sometimes we went to his house to learn from his mother. She was a famous tutor in our neighborhood, known even across the river. Students flocked to their house, to the point where their doorstep was worn out, especially on weekends. I ended up attending the university I wanted, and my friend went to a pretty good school. Although it was far from home, that time, it felt like I had the world at my fingertips. My friend's mother invited us to a party at their house. I brought a small gift my mother had prepared, which was some beef for grilling. It was a token of gratitude for her tutoring efforts. She laughed at the gift and told us to enjoy ourselves and stay over for the night. They had a projector installed at their house, as she enjoyed watching movies at home. That day, she played a nostalgic romance movie for us. We kept falling asleep and waking up during the movie. Of course, she watched it with us. My friend ended up sleeping on the sofa. His mother was seriously watching the movie. There was a somewhat sad scene, and I happened to wake up during it. She was wiping her tears with a tissue. I asked, "Is this movie very sad?" I fell asleep and missed some parts. She showed tears, saying she was reminded of her late husband, and I gently held her hand to comfort her. My friend started living alone since his university was far away, and at first he came home often, but as he got used to his new life, he rarely came home. I also got busy with my part-time job and didn't get to see my friend as often. One day, I ran into his mother at the local supermarket. She was still a beautiful woman, and she seemed glad to see me. She said it was lonely living alone without her son, and invited me over for a meal before we parted. A few days later, she called to invite me over to watch a movie she recently enjoyed while having dinner. She said she never gets tired of watching the same movie several times. I felt uncomfortable going over to their house without my friend, but I couldn't refuse an adult's invitation and brought some strawberries to their house. She had prepared an excessive amount of food. When I asked if she always ate like this, she said no, that she cooked depending on her mood that day. The meal she prepared was really delicious. She asked me about my university life, and I said it was awkward since I was only a freshman, but it was nice to have more free time compared to high school. She offered me a drink, and I took a sip and continued the conversation. When I asked her, "Do you have a boyfriend?" she said she met a man a few times who was introduced by one of her students' parents. He was polite, but she couldn't figure him out. She wasn't sure if she should continue to see him as a friend or as a potential partner. His business address turned out to be non-existent when she looked it up. I told her it's best not to date a man full of bluff and lies, even though I don't know much about it. She said she could live alone like this, but in reality, it was very lonely. Then she looked at me and asked, "Can you help me?" I didn't understand what she meant at first, so I couldn't answer. Seeing my hesitation, she gave me a big grin. That's when I realized her intention, and I awkwardly excused myself. After that day, I kept in touch with her occasionally. In fact, I contacted her more often. I couldn't tell anyone about our love relationship, especially not my friend. When my friend finished his freshman year and left for the military, his mother cried sorrowfully. I eased her loneliness with a blazing love. Can you imagine a relationship between a young man in his early 20s and a woman in her late 40s? At that time, I didn't have a girlfriend and had no interest in women. It was hard to find a woman as sophisticated, quiet, and feminine as her. Of course, there are good things about young girls my age, but it was not easy to find a woman who can converse and understand as broadly as she can from my perspective. She called me around her tutoring schedule, and I prioritized her over everything else. She said she had broken up with the man she was seeing. I was attracted to her because she looked beautiful. When she said she broke up with him and found me, a young man, more attractive, even though he had shown his feelings with gifts. She said her friends clearly divided when she became alone. She said some friends cut off contact when she became a widow. I heard later that they drew the line first, fearing she might ask for help. But she had the ability to stand on her own and had no reason to ask for help. Yet, she said she deleted all the contacts of those friends who drew the line, creating a situation where they were not ignoring her. And among the remaining friends, some interfered too much in her life. Especially, she was hurt by people who casually told her that a woman cannot live alone. She should get married soon, pretending to know her feelings. But she said she fell for me because I listened to her words. I showed maturity beyond my age. I planned a drive with her on a holiday. We took the highway to the seaside, and she screamed in joy like a child. She hadn't had the time to go out because of housework and tutoring, and she was happy to have such a luxury thanks to me. We checked into a motel with a view of the sea. She said she had been to such a place when she dated her husband and was happy to be back after a long time. She was in a very good mood that day, made noises she had never made at home, and we were able to have a good time several times because it was not a risky day. I had a good time with her until my mid-20s. When I went to the military, she brought me my favorite food, and I ate it shyly. When I heard the news that she had become a star in the sky due to an accident on the highway, when I was about to return to school after being discharged from the military, I cried a lot. I visit the charnel house where her ashes are enshrined whenever I think of her, who was always warm to me and shyly called me her husband. May you rest in peace in heaven.
Growing up, I often felt overshadowed, with my parents distant and preoccupied with work. Books became my refuge, offering an escape from the loneliness that followed me into my teenage years. I craved connection, someone to fill the emptiness I carried with me. That all changed when I met Anne-Marie Santos in middle school. She brightened my life, and our friendship quickly evolved into a romance that lasted through high school, college, and eventually marriage. I knew from the start that I wanted her in my life forever, despite my parents' concerns. We were close, but maintained our own lives, yet the moments we shared were always the most special. She was my best friend, and I made her my wife. Anne-Marie and I were opposites in many ways. She was outgoing, I was reserved. She was athletic, and I was more academic. Despite our differences, we had a genuine connection that kept us together. We never forced our relationship, but we always prioritized each other, sharing everything from dreams to fears. I wasn't sure if I believed in soulmates, but if they existed, she was mine. When I asked her father for her hand in marriage, he questioned everything, and I had to prove my love for her. I made a choice to love her, through good times and bad. Unfortunately, the worst came only 3 years later. I still loved her and wanted her happiness, even if it meant sacrificing my own. In recent months, Anne-Marie had become distant, coming home late and no longer smiling when she saw me. The realization that the person you love no longer loves you is devastating. One evening, she quietly entered the dining room, and I noticed the change in her demeanor. "Hi, Annie." "Hey, Gavin. Are you okay?" "Not really. Please sit so I can explain." I had rehearsed this moment, knowing I had to make the hardest decision of my life, letting you go. "Annie, I love you and always will. I don't want to argue or accuse. I just want us to decide together what's best, okay?" "Of course, Gavin. What's going on?" Her anxious eyes gave her away. "Annie, I've always wanted your happiness, but I know you're not happy with me." She teared up, and oddly, it was a comfort to see she was upset. "I don't want to dig into details. It'll just hurt more. But if we can agree you're unhappy, it'd mean a lot," she whispered. "Yes, Gavin, I know. Thank you. Your honesty reassures me I'm making the right choice. I want a divorce." Miguel Santos was a man I respected deeply. He and his wife, Maria, raised 8 kids in a small house in a tough neighborhood. He was strong and tough, but it was his loyalty to his family that impressed me most. I owed him an explanation, so I sat with him on his porch over a few beers and finally told him, "Miguel, why are you here?" "It's harder than I thought. Sir, I've loved no one but your daughter since I first met her. I promised you I'd always put her first, and that's what I'm doing now, even though I'm leaving Anne-Marie." As expected, he was angry, mixing English and Spanish in his demand for an explanation I couldn't fully give. "Sir, I love your daughter, but some things have to stay between us. It hurts to admit our marriage has failed, but I believe it's for the best. I wanted you to hear it from me." Eventually, he calmed down enough to let me share some details. Though upset and embarrassed, he allowed me to leave without further confrontation. Anne-Marie didn't cry or argue, and while I was relieved, a small part of me wished she'd begged me to stay. But she didn't, and that confirmed my decision. Her only reaction was when I mentioned talking to her father. "I spoke to your dad today and explained what I'm about to tell you. I hope we can part ways quickly. I don't want financial ruin on top of everything else. I've prepared the paperwork for dividing our assets, especially the house. Please review them and let me know by next week." "Okay, Gavin, I'll review them." I can already hear the criticism. Why not go after her and her lover? First, I don't have those skills. The last fight I got into was in high school when someone made Anne-Marie cry. I almost got expelled for it, but Miguel Santos helped keep things quiet. The second reason was my own mental health. I was a wreck, losing sleep, and almost got fired. I had no one to turn to. My mom died of chest cancer in college, and my dad, who became a hard drinker, moved to Florida and cut off contact. I needed a fresh start, and to do that, Anne-Marie had to agree to the divorce. I was only 25 and needed to rebuild my life. Revenge wasn't on my mind. 2 weeks later, we sat in the attorney's office. Anne-Marie gave up the house, which we agreed to sell. We split our accounts, and she kept the new car while I kept my old truck. Everything was settled except for the 90-day waiting period. The only thing I regretted was lying to Anne-Marie. "Where are you going to live, Gavin?" "I rented a small apartment near the office. I'll stay there until I figure things out." "Good. I guess I'll see you at the house closing, right?" "Absolutely. See you soon, Annie." In reality, I wasn't staying. My truck was packed, and I left my wedding ring on the kitchen table with a note that read, "Goodbye. I will always love you. Be happy." Before leaving town, I said goodbye to Miguel Santos. "Mijo, you and Anne Marie belong together. Can't there be forgiveness? Remember your vows?" "Yes, it's too fast." "Sir, I've forgiven her in my heart. I love your daughter, but I need peace." Maria Santos hugged me at the door. As she let me go, she softly said, "God bless you, mijo. I will miss you." I left quickly before I broke down. When your spouse is unhappy, it's helpful to know why, but I had no clue. Little things had come up, like leaving the toilet seat up, but recently we hadn't even argued. I thought maybe she was stressed with work, but she said she'd be fine. Trying to improve things, I did more around the house, cooking, dishes, laundry, hoping she'd notice. After a few weeks, I even cleaned the bathroom, a chore I hated. If I hadn't cleaned it, I might not have found out. I wouldn't have emptied the trash and discovered the pregnancy test. I dug deeper and found a positive test, then checked the birth control pills. They were untouched. That's when I realized another man had gotten my wife pregnant. But who? It didn't take long to figure out. I called Anne Marie, intending to ask, but her number was forwarded to the front desk. They said she had already left. Her car was still in the lot, so I drove to her office. About 20 minutes later, my hope that she had an accident vanished. 30 minutes later, I had my answer. Her boss, Michael James, pulled up next to her car. They kissed openly. My smile, once hers, was now for someone else. That was all I needed to know. I got home ahead of her and hid my feelings that night. She barely looked my way. In just over 2 hours, I knew my marriage was over and realized it was a 20-hour drive to Las Vegas. I made the trip in 4 days, driving through Nebraska, Colorado, and Utah. The peaceful scenery slowed me down, and I wasn't sure if my truck could handle the terrain. On the 4th day, I checked into a hotel, slept for 18 hours, and spent the next day filling out housing applications. Less than a week earlier, I was a newly divorced 25-year-old with no family. Now, I was a first-year law student in a dorm room, starting a new life. I wish I could share stories of new adventures after college, but the reality was different. I had no experience dating. Gavin and Anne Marie had always been a pair. I had no idea where to start. During law school, I never went on a single date or made close friends. If anyone showed interest, I missed the signs. Instead, I buried myself in studies, using school as an escape. I spent 4 years earning my Juris Doctor and MBA, aiming for a 4.0 GPA. Anne Marie and I once talked about going back to school when we were financially stable. So, when I moved on, I took the LSAT, applied to schools, and got accepted in Las Vegas with a full scholarship. I didn't know much about the school or the city, just that it was far from home. Once a month, I'd write to Mr. and Mrs. Santos about my studies. It was a habit I picked up from my parents, perhaps out of routine or a need to feel someone cared. 13 weeks into my first semester, I received a package confirming the exact value of my broken heart, $7,642 after fees. It was probably the third most depressing day of my life. Occasionally, I'd get an email from Miguel or Maria Santos. I never told them where I really was, and they never asked. They'd share updates about their other children, but never about Anne Marie, letting me imagine I still had a family that cared. For the first 6 or 7 months, I kept in touch. They never explicitly mentioned forgiveness or reconciliation, but hinted at it until, suddenly, the hints stopped. I never doubted Anne Marie would keep her baby. But I wondered if she'd tell her parents the truth before it became obvious. I also wondered if Michael James would leave his wife and 3 kids to do right by Anne Marie. I didn't have the courage to ask. But I knew a child born to a black man wouldn't look like me. I felt like a coward when I sent flowers, balloons, and a gift basket to the James home, congratulating them on the baby. I sent a duplicate to Anne Marie's office, addressed to the company president. I promised myself I wouldn't stoop to hurting anyone, even Michael James, but the pain was too much. I didn't spread rumors, just offered my congratulations. I was genuinely happy for Anne Marie, knowing she was working toward her dream of a big family, but I couldn't ignore that her happiness came at the cost of my pain. Without knowing what happened after my gifts, I imagined a disastrous outcome for Michael James, however unlikely. This small, cowardly act allowed me to close that chapter of my life. I was still hurting, but it was over. My social life suffered for years after the divorce. My first real friend was a colleague 20 years older. I joined a small law firm specializing in real estate, where I found I had a knack for contracts, numbers, and eventually, people. Gavin, people need to trust you to solve their problems. They hand you the keys to their dreams, and you have to deliver. You've got a gift, and I'll help you use it. David Rothschild, the senior partner, became more than just my boss. He was my mentor and life coach. A legend in real estate law, he was known for negotiating multi-million-dollar deals. He made me his next project, and just 90 days into my career, he gave me my first evaluation. Gavin, you're dedicated and meticulous. You do excellent work. Thank you, Mr. Rothschild. But as a person, you're completely out of touch. Are you 30 or 90? Let's go for a walk. That's how our weekly Gavin project meetings began. Rothschild was brilliant. He'd ask questions, let me talk, and share stories. I opened up about everything: my life, parents, law school, and Anne-Marie. We have a lot to work on, but also a lot to work with. Now, let's get back to the office. At first, I didn't understand his motives, but after 3 years, the results were clear. His subtle guidance helped me grow. I started going to the gym, learning to cook, making better investments, and buying real estate. Without his help, I might have had a nice middle-class life. With it, I became a confident, successful business person. Rothschild never wanted credit, saying, "Watching you succeed is thanks enough." I worked with Rothschild for almost 5 years. After helping me succeed in business, he turned his focus to my personal life. One day, he casually asked, "Gavin, what are you getting your parents for their anniversary?" I was confused since both my parents had passed away, and he knew that. "Come on, Gavin. Next month, Miguel and Maria Santos will be married for 50 years. Only a jackass wouldn't mark an event like that." He was right. The Santos were like parents to me. I kept in touch with them, sending messages and gifts. For their 50th anniversary, I gave them the best: first-class airfare, a 5-star hotel stay, a limo, fine dining, and VIP show tickets in Las Vegas. I sent it with a note: "Happy anniversary. Use these as you wish. Love, Gavin." I didn't expect anything in return, so I was surprised when I received a call at noon the next day. "Gavin O'Connor," I answered. "Oh, mijo, what a wonderful surprise." "But this is too much," Mrs. Santos exclaimed. "Mrs. Santos, it's lovely to hear from you, but you and your husband deserve this, and I'm honored to give it to you," I replied warmly. "Oh, Gavin, you've always been such a wonderful boy. Un momento. Miguel wants to talk," she said, handing the phone to her husband. "Gavin," Mr. Santos began. "Yes, sir," I responded, knowing what was coming. "Gavin, this is too much. I can't let you go to such lengths. I can't imagine the cost. It's too much," he continued, his words rushing out. "Senor Santos, Miguel, Papa," I interrupted gently. "Yes, Gavin," he replied, finally pausing. "This gift doesn't even begin to repay the kindness you've shown me over the years. It brings me joy to give it to you. Please accept it in the spirit it was intended," I said sincerely. After a brief silence, he responded, "Si, mijo, we accept." "Wonderful. Happy anniversary," I said, feeling relieved. The conversation shifted to the trip details, and I explained all the highlights I thought they'd enjoy. After exchanging many words of gratitude and love, we ended the call, and for the first time in nearly a decade, I felt a sense of peace. As I reflected on that, I noticed Rothschild standing in my doorway with a big grin on his face. "Damn ungrateful kids," he teased. "Shut up, old man," I shot back with a smile. The Santos vacation didn't unfold as I had expected. I assumed they'd use the gift for sightseeing, fine dining, and relaxation. They did, but they insisted I join them every step of the way. It was clear they hadn't even been in their room for 5 minutes before my phone rang. "Gavin O'Connor," I answered again. "Mijo, when are you coming to see us?" Mrs. Santos asked eagerly. "Hello, Mrs. Santos. How was the flight?" I inquired, trying to buy a moment to think. Good. Miguel says we need to rest for a bit, but then we're ready to go." "When will you be here?" she pressed. "I can be there in about an hour," I replied, realizing I'd have to rearrange my day. "Great, mijo. See you then," she said cheerfully before hanging up. Honestly, I hadn't planned on spending much time with the Santos during their trip. They had plenty to do, and I had a pile of work on my desk. I was figuring out how to manage my schedule when Rothschild walked in with 2 paralegals. "Gavin, I've given you some time off. You need a break. Now get out of here and don't come back for a week or you're fired," Rothschild commanded, leaving no room for argument. The paralegals quickly packed up my work and cleared my desk. "Gavin, spend time with your parents. I'll handle the rest," Rothschild said, his tone softer but firm. So I did. The Santos insisted on visiting my office, though. Rothschild, who rarely joked about work, seemed ready for us when we arrived. He gave the Santos a personal tour, introducing them as my parents. In the conference room, he spent nearly an hour talking about my work, praising my accomplishments, and treating them like royalty. It was heartwarming to see the Santos beaming with pride, especially Maria, who kept patting my hand every time someone complimented me. "We're so proud of you, mijo." The rest of the week followed the same pattern. Rothschild's influence was evident everywhere we went. I had chosen the limo, resort, restaurants, and shows based on my business connections, but Rothschild ensured we were treated like VIPs. We were welcomed by owners and directors who shared stories of how I'd helped them and offered us the best seats, wine, and service. It was impressive. Mr. and Mrs. Santos, I have to admit this week has been more eventful than I expected. I know these people, but I've never received this level of service before. My daily life is much simpler. Gavin, it's wonderful that you have so many friends who wanted to show us how special you are. We always knew you were special, and we've always been proud to call you that. Maria couldn't finish, so Miguel stepped in. Our son, you are who you are and always will be. You took an oath before God that made you part of our family, and you fulfilled that vow. You've been a constant in our lives since you were a baby, and we've had the honor of watching you grow into a fine man. A father couldn't ask for more. Gavin, we love you and are very proud of you. Miguel Santos had aged, but his strength was still formidable. His hug felt like he might break a rib, and moments later Maria joined in, giving me a long-awaited family moment that filled me with joy. Their visit flew by, and I was sad to see them go, but I promised to visit them soon after handling some business. Rothschild knew exactly what I needed. I returned to work motivated, and when I shared my idea, he just smiled and gave his approval. The project was small and wouldn't generate long-term income, but it was probably the most important one I'd ever undertaken. In 6 weeks, I completed almost all the title deeds, secured a buyer with full financing, and made a few key phone calls. Armed with new information, I booked a flight back to my hometown for the first time in nearly 10 years. At the airport, I met Amy and Lydia, who worked at a coffee kiosk. I overheard them talking about their broken appliances and unresponsive landlord. When Amy handed me my coffee, I gave her my card with instructions. "I overheard your conversation. I think I can help. Call the number and ask for Marcus. Tell him Gavin sent you and that you need Melvin's help. He'll take it from there. If you need help finding a new place, Marcus can assist. I've written everything on the back." As my flight was called, I added, "Don't worry about the cost. Just use the number. Good luck." Why did I offer to help them? Simple. I've seen a lot of bad landlords in real estate, and Rothschild taught me that real estate isn't a zero-sum game. The best deals benefit everyone. A few calls, a letter, and some work from a paralegal could get these girls out of a bad situation. We did pro bono work from time to time, and this was no different. I sent Marcus a quick email so he wouldn't be caught off guard when the call came. The flight to Omaha was short. I got my rental car and luggage, then drove around the city. Not much had changed, though it no longer felt like home. I passed through the Santos' neighborhood, where most houses were in disrepair except for theirs. The area had clearly been neglected. My destination was a new condominium complex with condos above retail spaces, restaurants, a theater, and stores, including a grocery store. The design was unique to the area, and everything seemed perfect. The apartment I had was brand new, with 2 bedrooms, a spacious open living area, a den, and a large balcony overlooking a park. The master suite was spa-like, with a jetted tub and a large tiled shower. The place was beautifully furnished with top-of-the-line fixtures and appliances, a few personal touches, and it would feel like home. The Santos met me for dinner at one of the restaurants, arriving on time and dressed for a night out. We had a great dinner filled with laughter, hoping the rest of the evening would be just as enjoyable. Miguel and Maria Santos, both 67, had been married for 50 years. They were still young at heart, but showed signs of a lifetime of hard work. During our time in Las Vegas, I learned they were ready to retire, but worried about their finances and living in a neighborhood surrounded by crime and abandoned houses. My goal was to change that. As Rothschild reminded me, this is what children do for their parents. I invited the Santos back to the condo for a late-night party. When we stepped into the elevator, they looked surprised. "I didn't know this was a hotel, mijo. These rooms must be expensive." "Yeah, we need to talk about that." When I opened the apartment door, they were impressed with the room. I had asked their 7 children to describe the Santos dream home, and I made sure to cover all their preferences. Their attention then shifted to the champagne. "Are we celebrating?" "Yes, I hope so." "What's the occasion?" I popped the cork. "Your retirement and new home." I raised my glass and gestured around the room. "Oh my goodness, this is too much. We can't accept it. It's not a gift, but you'll have more than enough to buy it. Please sit down and let's discuss it." They were hesitant, but things were going well. "When we sign these documents, we'll form a partnership, the Santos Investment Group. First, we'll close on 19 properties near your house. Then we'll package those with your current home, request a zoning change, and sell them to Property Management International, which plans to build a hotel and retail space next to the new arena. We'll receive the sale proceeds within 90 days. I showed them the highlighted dollar amount on the paper. They were shocked. "This apartment is rented for the next 3 months with an option to buy. Here's the cost." I handed them another paper. "Half of the remaining profits will fund a lifetime annuity for you both, with monthly dividends." I showed them the third paper. "You'll be able to retire comfortably in your new home. I'm just offering business advice and free legal services." They wouldn't become rich, but they'd never have to work again. It was a silver parachute, and it would be enough. "Gavin, how did you manage this so quickly?" "Buying the property next to yours took some effort, but Rothschild found a buyer through his connections. A new casino is being built across the river in Iowa, so we negotiated the price based on that. The zoning change will happen with the help of our buyer's contacts on the city council. The rest is just a solid investment." Maria cried but smiled, and Miguel shook his head in disbelief. "It's a miracle, more than we could have imagined," Anne-Marie's voice echoed with genuine surprise. "No one deserves it more than you two," I replied, offering sincere congratulations. I hadn't seen or heard from Anne-Marie in 10 years. Her parents and siblings never mentioned her, and she had faded from my thoughts long ago. But when I saw her again, it was as if I had awakened from a deep sleep. I had loved her throughout my youth and early adulthood, but now I felt nothing. Our meeting was entirely coincidental. I needed to pick up a few things for an upcoming trip, and the new mall had one of my favorite stores. While browsing, I heard a familiar voice behind me. "You have great taste," Anne-Marie said, her tone a mix of surprise and nostalgia. I turned to find her looking much as I remembered, older, with a less radiant smile and a few extra pounds. She was simply a more mature version of the woman I once married. "Hi, Anne-Marie," I greeted her, not quite sure what to expect. "Why are you here?" she asked, her voice tinged with curiosity. "I'm shopping. And you?" I responded, keeping the conversation light. "Oh, I work here now," she explained. "I meant, why are you in town?" "Just finishing up some business and visiting old friends," I answered. "Was I on your list of friends to visit?" she asked, her tone half joking but with a hint of hope. "Honestly, no," I admitted. "Oh, okay. Nice to see you, Gavin," she said, a touch of disappointment in her voice. "You too, Anne-Marie," I replied, thinking that would be the end of it. Awkward, but manageable. I didn't expect to see her again, but as I was leaving, I noticed her at the cash register. After finishing her transaction, she approached me again. "Gavin, how long will you be in town?" she asked, a bit more tentatively this time. "Maybe a few days," I replied, still unsure where this was going. "Do you think we could get together and talk, at least a little?" she asked, handing me her card. "I'll think about it," I said, taking the card but not committing to anything. I walked away without another word. I had moved on and didn't have anything more to say to her. Yet, against my better judgment, 2 nights later, I found myself sitting alone in a booth at one of my favorite bars. This was a place where Anne-Marie and I used to meet friends after work on Fridays. It felt different now. When she arrived, she was dressed up, wearing a little black dress that showed off her curves, black heels, and carefully done makeup. If she'd been a stranger, I might have bought her a drink. She looked good. I didn't stand when she slid into the booth across from me. She waited a few moments before speaking. "You lied to me," she began, her voice tinged with accusation. "And you lied to me first," I retorted, both of us knowing exactly what the other meant. She looked momentarily embarrassed before continuing. "I didn't think you'd actually leave town. I hoped we'd have a chance to talk," she confessed. "What would have been the point?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "I don't know, but I wasn't happy when you left," she admitted, her voice softening. "Well, you didn't give me a choice, so I don't feel guilty about your unhappiness," I replied, my tone blunt but honest. She seemed surprised by my frankness, but I wasn't interested in sugarcoating the past. "Gavin, I never stopped loving you, even after what I did," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I sighed, sensing that she was about to revisit old wounds. "Anne-Marie, the only good thing about our divorce was that you never lied to me, probably because I didn't give you a chance. But I won't sit here if you're going to lie now. What do you even want? Why are we sitting here? Nothing will change what happened. But you never fought for me. You just gave up without even arguing. It was so unexpected. Why did you leave without trying? I thought you loved me. We'll have to agree to disagree. From my view, you gave up on me without a word. You abandoned me without a chance to fix things. I just put it in writing. That was a mistake, Gavin. I made a huge mistake, and I'm sorry, okay? Anne-Marie's voice wavered as she spoke, her eyes pleading for forgiveness. I groaned inwardly. The years apart had given me clarity, but it seemed they had left Anne-Marie clinging to delusions. Nonsense, I shot back, refusing to let her rewrite history. Her eyes watered, but I knew everything she said was a lie. Just because things didn't turn out as you hoped doesn't mean you can rewrite history, I continued. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending you care. I did care, Gavin. I loved you. I still love you, she insisted, her voice thick with emotion. You honestly believe that? I asked, incredulous. It's true, Gavin, she affirmed, her gaze steady. Okay, let's explore that, I said, leaning forward. Was it you or Michael James who decided I should be deprived of sex with my loving wife? She looked me in the eye, a flicker of shame crossing her face, but mostly reluctance to answer. It was him, she finally admitted. So your endless love for me let you sleep with another man and follow his wishes, knowing it would hurt me, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Gavin, she started, but I cut her off. How long did you wait before stopping birth control? I demanded. What? Well, she stammered. You didn't accidentally get pregnant. You wanted him to father your child. When were you planning to tell me? Or were you going to pretend it was mine? I pressed, watching her squirm. She didn't bother to answer. Why aren't you with him? Where is he? I asked, shifting the focus. He didn't want me, she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. His wife found out, and so did his boss. His wife divorced him, and he had to resign. He left me. I had to quit my job, too. It was too embarrassing. And I'm supposed to feel bad? Why? I asked, my tone icy. I don't know, Gavin, she said, her voice breaking. I made a mistake, got involved in something bad and couldn't stop. I know I was wrong. Can't you forgive me? I love you. I died the day you left and missed you ever since. I wanted you to come back, to give me a chance to apologize, to tell you I'd never do it again. I'm all alone, Gavin. My parents barely talk to me, my siblings avoid me, and I have no friends. I'm all alone. Anne-Marie, I forgave you a long time ago, but there's no going back, I said firmly. You have your child. He can keep you warm at night. That's cruel, Gavin, she said, her voice tinged with hurt. No more cruel than the lies you're telling me, I responded, unyielding. I'm not lying, Gavin. I want another chance. It's what I've dreamed of all these years, she pleaded. It's never going to happen, I stated, leaving no room for doubt. Why, Gavin? I know you love me. You said you always would, she reminded me, desperation creeping into her voice. I've always loved you, but that's not enough, I admitted, feeling the weight of the truth. Why not? She asked, her voice trembling. 2 reasons. First, I'm not the same person who married you. I've changed, and you don't know me anymore. I certainly don't know you if I ever did, I explained. You do know me, Gavin. I'm still the same woman you loved. So what's the second reason? She asked, clinging to hope. That's the first honest thing you've said. But here's the second reason, then a question. You wanted someone else, and I let you have him without a harsh word, because I loved you. Since I left, I've gone to law school, passed the bar, started a new career, and built a new life. But I haven't been with another woman since our last time together. So tell me, how many men have you been with while you've been pining for me? Anne-Marie couldn't even look me in the eye. You see, Anne-Marie, I knew you were telling the truth. But back then, I didn't realize that the woman I loved was a lying, cheating person. How could I ever trust you again? Why would I even want to? Give me one reason why I'd let you back into my life that wouldn't just benefit you. If you can do that, maybe we have a chance. She cried quietly as I stood up to leave. That's what I thought. Goodbye, Anne-Marie. 3 months later, I saw them again, while heading back to Omaha for business. Everything was going smoothly, and Miguel and Maria were enjoying their new home. Seeing them so happy warmed my heart. The women serving customers at the coffee kiosk giggled and smiled this time. I was deep in my phone when they called my name. Mr. O'Connor? A voice called out, catching my attention. Yes, can I help you? I responded, turning to face them. At first, I didn't recognize the two women, but then it clicked. Oh, right. How did it go? I asked, recalling our previous interaction. Fine, Mr. O'Connor, the brunette replied. We wanted to thank you, but we didn't know how. It's Gavin, and no thanks are necessary. I'm just glad it worked out, I said with a reassuring smile. The brunette, a pretty woman named Amy with curly hair and a friendly smile, spoke while her cousin, Lydia, a shy blonde, stood quietly beside her. As my flight was announced, I began to gather my things, preparing to board. Nice to see you both again, I said, ready to leave. Just as I was about to step away, Amy ran up and handed me a napkin with a phone number scribbled on it. We'd like to thank you properly. Will you call when you get back? She asked, her tone hopeful. Caught off guard, I simply nodded. Sure, no problem, I replied, tucking the napkin into my pocket. On big holidays, the family always gathered. Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas, 4th of July, and Cinco de Mayo. It was unusual to ask everyone to gather in September, but that's what I did. I was surprised everyone fit into the Santos' new apartment. The space was cozy but comfortable for the gathering. They all looked at me, waiting for what I had to say. It was going to be one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Maybe they wouldn't think it was my place to speak, but it felt right. As Rothschild always said, I was following my gut. I wanted everyone here, so I only had to say this once, and you all could hear it at the same time. Being treated as a full member of this family has been one of my greatest joys. Miguel and Maria, your love and support helped me through tough times, and I'll always be grateful. But I also remember that Anne-Marie was part of this family too. She shared in the joy and pain like the rest of us. She cheated on me, and I made hard choices because of that. But she didn't cheat on any of you. A few months ago, I spoke to her for the first time in 10 years. It was a painful conversation. I said harsh things to her. But what hurt most was what she told me about all of you. So, with all due respect, I need to say this. You all need to stop being little a-holes and stop ostracizing your daughter and sister. Until she's back where she belongs, I want nothing to do with you. Mr. and Mrs. Santos, I won't contact you, and you shouldn't contact me until this nonsense is over. The shocked expressions on their faces didn't bring me any satisfaction. With those words, I walked away from my foster family, unsure if I'd ever see them again. The next year was hectic, both professionally and personally. In the office, we worked at a breakneck pace that was unsustainable. After almost 8 weeks of 14-hour days and non-stop deals, Rothschild had enough. One evening in the conference room, he let us know. That's it, I'm done. I can't stand the sight of any of you. We're closed. Everyone, get out of here and don't come back for a week. I'll pay you if I don't have to see you. Then he walked out of the building. On the first day of my mandatory break, I cleaned my apartment and discovered furniture buried under piles of papers, clothes, and takeout containers. I sorted my laundry, emptying my pockets as I went, and found the napkin with Amy's number on it. By the third day, with a clean apartment and updated closet, the napkin was still sitting on my dining room table like a centerpiece, so I decided to call. I sounded like an idiot. Hello? Amy answered the phone. Yes, can I, speak to Amy, please? I stammered, suddenly feeling nervous. This is her, she replied. Oh, hi, Amy. This is Gavin O'Connor. We met at the airport. You gave me your number? I reminded her, hoping she remembered. Yes, I remember you, Gavin, she said, her tone warm and familiar. Well, I know it's short notice, but would you and Lydia like to come over for dinner tonight? I thought I'd cook for you both and hear how things went with your apartment. We got kicked out of the office for a week and I'm bored, I explained, trying to sound casual. She giggled and I felt a bit embarrassed by my rambling. Gavin, we'd love to have dinner at your apartment tonight, Amy replied enthusiastically. Fantastic. Great. Can I get your address? I asked, realizing I hadn't given her the details yet. I provided my address, feeling a bit flustered but excited. Later, when they arrived, I felt much more comfortable talking to Amy and Lydia in person. Lydia was still quiet, but she made eye contact and smiled, which was more than enough to put me at ease. This is a great apartment, Gavin. Do you host parties here often? Amy asked, looking around appreciatively. My apartment was impressive, mostly because it was part of a project Rothschild and I were working on. I had jumped at the chance to buy a 3-bedroom penthouse with a fantastic view of the Strip, but I didn't mention that I also owned the building. Actually, you're the first visitors I've had, besides my boss, I admitted. Really? No girlfriend? Amy asked, surprised. Nope. I haven't even been on a date since my divorce 10 years ago, I said casually, focusing on the meal I was preparing. Amy and Lydia sat at the kitchen island, sipping wine while I cooked. Amy asked me a lot of questions, and I enjoyed the conversation. It was refreshing to talk to someone other than my boss and coworkers. As I continued cooking, I noticed both of them staring at me in shock. What? Did I say something wrong? I asked, puzzled by their reactions. You haven't been on a date in 10 years, Gavin, Amy repeated, clearly astonished. No, I haven't. I've been busy with work and studies. Is that weird? I asked, genuinely curious. Yes, Amy said emphatically, and even Lydia nodded in agreement. Well, I guess it is kind of weird, I conceded with a shrug. Jesus, Gavin, I can't believe it, Amy said, shaking her head in disbelief. It's true. Anyway, dinner's ready. Let's eat, I said, steering the conversation back to the meal. Dinner was fun, filled with laughter. I learned that Amy was in her final year studying hospitality management, and Lydia was studying English with a focus on creative writing. They were both 22 and had been living together since they were 18 when Lydia's parents passed away. Amy mentioned that Lydia liked me and would eventually open up more. The atmosphere felt a bit electric, and I wondered if they were flirting with me. I enjoyed the attention, even if it was just in my head. At the end of the evening, both girls gave me a brief hug and kiss on the cheek before leaving, with Amy suggesting we meet again soon. I jokingly said I was free for the rest of the week, and to my surprise, they showed up the next day with a picnic basket. We ate lunch on the balcony and enjoyed the day until it got too hot. Then they left for work. They took my invitation seriously. The next evening, they returned with pizza, popcorn, and a movie. They shared the couch while I settled into my favorite chair. The following day, Amy asked if they could use the pool. I assured her I'd take care of it. When they arrived, I had keys to the pool and gym for them, along with a locker. Sometimes it's good to be in charge. They had a surprise for me, too. When they came out in their bikinis, I realized I'd need to step up my workouts. After my week off, we fell into a routine. I'd work during the day, and they'd visit a few evenings a week for dinner, a movie, or just to hang out. On weekends, we found activities to do together. They also used the gym regularly, even when I wasn't there. Rothschild loved teasing me about it. If I didn't know you so well, I'd think you were dating two women at the same time. Give me a break, man. We're just friends, and keep your fantasies to yourself. About 4 months into our friendship, I noticed something was off. During a quiet Friday night dinner at my place, the girls seemed unusually reserved. As dinner wrapped up, the tension was too much to ignore. Girls, is something wrong? No, not really. Lydia hesitated, then spoke. Amy wants to ask you something, but we're not sure how to phrase it. Amy, you can ask me anything. I have no filter with you two. Just ask, and I promise not to be offended by my answer. Amy took a deep breath. Why haven't you ever made a move on us? Don't you find us attractive? I was caught off guard and took a moment to collect myself. You're both stunningly beautiful, but I haven't made a move for 2 reasons. First, I don't want to ruin our friendship or make you think I'm some old guy hanging around for kicks. Second, I'm not even sure I know how to make a move. I've never had the chance. Amy and Lydia exchanged a glance. Then Amy continued. Gavin, we really enjoy spending time with you, and we both like you a lot. I like spending time with you too. But Lydia and I are looking for someone special, and we want you to understand what that means. Ladies, you're both extremely attractive, and I'm sure you'll each find someone special without any problem. Lydia seemed like she wanted to say something, but Amy pressed on. Gavin, we don't want to find 2 separate special people. We want one. And we think that person might be, well, you. I was stunned. Before I could respond, Amy added, we want you to understand what we're asking. Lydia wants you to read some of her work tonight. We think it'll help you understand what we're looking for. Then we can talk tomorrow about what this means for all of us. Can you do that? I think I can. You just want me to read her stories? Yes, Gavin, and then we'll talk. I realize this might give you the wrong impression of me. I have strong beliefs about right and wrong, and I treat the people I care about with kindness and respect. I believe in live and let live, as long as no one is getting hurt. However, I can also be tough when necessary, especially in business. Rothschild called it my Jekyll and Hyde quality, giving people a head start but not hesitating to retaliate if crossed. I wasn't like this before Anne-Marie broke my heart. Her betrayal made me fiercely loyal to those I trust and ruthless to those who betray me. For a long time after the divorce, I had little interest in romance. The pain of the divorce consumed me, and anything that reminded me of Anne-Marie was unbearable. I coped by focusing on my studies and work. It took years for the pain to fade. I had missed out on a lot of life experiences because I met the love of my life so young. I had never asked a girl out, never had a one-night stand, and didn't know how to attract someone. Fear of rejection held me back. I was confident in many things, but thanks to Anne-Marie, I felt insecure about relationships. 10 years passed, and I began to think I'd never get the chance to try something new. With that mindset, I read Lydia's stories. They were beautifully written, full of vivid imagery and well-drawn characters. I learned a lot about Lydia from her writing. The next day, the girls arrived around noon. I was worried I might ruin our friendship. After getting drinks and snacks, we settled in the living room. Amy got straight to the point. Lydia and I aren't involved with each other sexually. Okay, that's important to know, but honestly, I hadn't thought about it. Lydia smiled as Amy continued. We've always looked out for each other. We're not just cousins, we're best friends. When we started getting interested in boys, we'd talk about what we liked and what we wanted. I've always been drawn to sweet, caring guys, while Lydia has been attracted to more assertive alpha types. The guys she dated were great in bed, but often treated her poorly on dates. Even though I understood her attraction, I didn't want her to get hurt. They sat together, holding hands. Then our worst fears came true. One of Lydia's boyfriends became too aggressive, and a few weeks later she found out she was pregnant. The pregnancy didn't go well, and they had to terminate it for her health. Complications arose, and Lydia can't have children. Tears filled their eyes. We had always dreamed of our children playing together. We were only 19, and that dream ended before it could start. But I love Lydia more than a cousin, more than a friend. We decided our dream didn't have to end. We would share my children and raise them together as co-mothers. They looked at me, gauging my reaction. I was moved by Amy's selflessness. It was one of the saddest, kindest, and most beautiful stories I'd ever heard. They smiled softly. But then we had another problem, finding the right person. The guys I liked were too weak for Lydia, and the ones she liked were too arrogant for me. We needed someone special, kind, yet confident. And then we met you, Lydia whispered, speaking to me for the first time. My heart raced. Amy continued. You helped us without asking for anything in return. It was one of the nicest things anyone had done for us. As we got to know you, we realized you might be the one we were looking for. We decided to be honest with you, even if it meant risking our friendship. I was stunned, realizing I'd been offered a life with both of them. This is a lot to take in. I need some time to think. Can we take a break and talk more over the weekend? Of course, Gavin, we understand, Amy replied, and they left quickly. I already knew my answer, but wanted to give them a thoughtful response. They had shared something deeply personal, and I wanted to respond in kind. Later that afternoon, I ran some errands, then returned to my apartment and sent a text to Lydia before calling Amy. Hello? Amy answered. Hi, Amy, it's Gavin. I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner with me tonight, I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. In the background, I could hear Lydia's phone ringing, followed by her surprised sigh. Gavin, I'd love to have dinner tonight, Amy replied warmly. Great, I'll pick you up at 7 o'clock, I said, feeling a sense of anticipation. After I hung up, I waited for Lydia's response. The message I had sent her was riskier. Be at my place at 6:15. Don't be late. You'll be staying the night. Her reply came quickly and simply. Perfect. When I arrived to pick up Amy, I was momentarily speechless. She looked stunning in a little black dress. I handed her a bouquet of white lilies. Wow, you look amazing, I said, genuinely impressed. Thank you, Gavin, for the flowers and the compliment, she responded with a smile. Our evening was romantic. We shared wine and sushi at one of her favorite restaurants, then went to a nightclub for drinks. We talked about our dreams, future plans, kids, and family. By the end of the night, we had bonded deeply. As we walked through a park holding hands, I couldn't shake a lingering worry. What's bothering you, Gavin? Amy asked, sensing my unease. Why me, Amy? I'm over 10 years older than you, divorced, and every eye was on you tonight. You could have anyone, I confessed, my insecurities slipping out. Gavin, you'll figure it out soon. But for tonight, can you accept that you're the one? There's no one else for me, she reassured me. Yes, I can live with that. Thank you for a wonderful evening, Amy, I said, feeling more at ease. No, Gavin, thank you, she replied, squeezing my hand. On Easter Sunday, I found myself in my old church, feeling out of place. I had converted to Catholicism to marry Anne Marie and was a faithful parishioner during our marriage, but it felt strange to be there again. I'd been sitting alone for about 15 minutes when someone sat down next to me. "This seems like a good place for confession. Forgive me, Gavin, for I have sinned," Anne Marie said, breaking the silence. "Anne Marie, I forgave you a long time ago," I replied, turning to face her. "I know, Gavin, but you forgave me when I didn't deserve it, when I wasn't even sorry. Now I understand the pain I caused you. I wish I could take it all back. I always thought you deserved someone better. I'm so sorry I couldn't be the woman you deserved. Thank you for giving me my family back. My dad told me it was because of you." "Thank you, Anne Marie. I appreciate your apology. You're always welcome." Mass went well, and Easter brunch was enjoyable. But as the day went on, I realized there was no longer a place for me in the Santos family. It was time to move on. When it was time to leave, there were tearful goodbyes. Maria Santos hugged me at the door, understanding more than she said. She placed her hand on my cheek, closed her eyes for a moment, and then whispered, "God bless you, Micho. I will miss you." My personal life was far from normal. For months, Amy, Lydia, and I had settled into an unusual pattern, spending most of our time together as a close-knit trio. If they had lived with me full-time, we might have spent only a few hours more together each week. I was very happy dating Amy, though our relationship hadn't progressed beyond kissing. She believed we'd both know when the time was right, and I agreed. The oddest part was that she had no problem making me tense and then sending me to Lydia for relief. Lydia, for her part, blossomed under this arrangement. Amy told me that Lydia had thought I was perfect from the start. Lydia needed guidance, which made her feel safe and cared for, and I gradually took over that role from Amy. The turning point was the flowers. I hadn't thought much about giving them flowers, but it felt right. I gave Amy flowers on our first date and at random moments because it was romantic. Lydia's flowers were a thank you, delivered separately due to circumstances. My first date with Amy was wonderful, but as I returned to Lydia, I worried I wouldn't meet her needs. I needn't have worried. Over the next few months, I thought a lot about how to win Lydia over, but that first night, instinct took over. When Lydia walked in with the biggest smile, holding her flowers, I knew I'd done the right thing. As I left Omaha for the last time, I felt a deep satisfaction. I had survived Anne Marie's betrayal, started a new life, and built a career. But something was still missing: real happiness. On the way home, I made a stop, bought 2 things, and quickly returned. When I got home, Amy and Lydia were happy to see me, and we had a light, fun dinner together. I hoped to make our lives even better. After dinner, as they cleaned up in the kitchen, I watched them working together, enjoying the task simply because they were together. "I know why we haven't had sex," I said. Lydia turned to look at me, while Amy kept her eyes on the sink. "When we make love for the first time, it will be to create life, to share a piece of ourselves for a common purpose. That's why we'll be together. But there's an even more important reason. You'll be giving Lydia and me something we can't get on our own, a child." Lydia smiled through her tears. "I think you've been waiting for me to realize this, and you've waited long enough." I knelt down and pulled out a box. Lydia began to jump with excitement as I opened it. Amy slowly turned, tears in her eyes. "Amy, will you marry me?" "Yes, Gavin, I will. I'll love you forever and give you everything I have." Amy and Lydia hugged first, showing how close they were and how much we all needed each other. I slipped the ring onto Amy's finger, and Lydia admired it. "That's a beautiful ring, Gavin. You're not left out, Lydia. You're a vital part of our lives." I pulled out a second box containing an ankle bracelet with a diamond set in a Celtic knot with 3 birthstones: ruby, sapphire, and amethyst. "Lydia, we love you and need you. Please don't ever leave us." Amy was crying, but Lydia was calm as I fastened the bracelet around her ankle. "I'm home, Gavin. I'm not going anywhere." We were married 3 months later in a small ceremony with Lydia beside Amy and Rothschild next to me. 6 months later, Aidan James O'Connor was born. Twins Sophia Marie and Stephen Michael followed, and then baby Olivia Rose. The boys looked like me. Sophia was a tiny version of Amy, and Olivia was a clone of Lydia. Their bond was instant and unbreakable. Were Amy and I jealous that Olivia treated Lydia like her only parent while we were like a beloved aunt and uncle? Not at all. Amy and I lived as husband and wife, but Lydia was always close. My journey to happiness took time, but I found my place again. Our life together was as perfect as any relationship could be. I loved Amy, Lydia, and our children. Amy loved me, Lydia, and the kids. Lydia loved Amy, needed me, and gave our children a mother's love. We've never shared our lifestyle publicly, and only our closest friends know the truth, but we live a very happy life together.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
People always say, I never saw it coming, and honestly, that's exactly how it was for me. My wife and I had been together for 4 solid years, married the whole time. I genuinely thought we had a good thing going. We had plans, an entire life mapped out, and for the most part, I truly believed we were on the same page. Here's the thing. We both wanted kids, or at least I thought we did. Right after we got married, we started talking about it seriously. She would always talk about wanting 2 or 3 kids, imagining what we'd name them, how we'd decorate the nursery, the works. She'd spend hours online looking at baby clothes and gadgets, planning this future life for us and our kids. It was our thing, something that brought us closer. We were excited, ready to take that next step together, and everything seemed perfect. But then, out of nowhere, we were hit with news that completely knocked the wind out of me. After a few months of trying to have kids with no success, we decided to see a doctor to figure out what was going on. Long story short, it was me. My count was way too low, and the doctor told us our chances of having kids naturally were slim to none. It felt like a punch to the gut. I was crushed. All those plans we'd made just vanished in an instant. The news hit me hard, really hard. I ended up in a pretty dark place for a while. Therapy eventually helped, but in the beginning, I was a wreck. At first, my wife seemed supportive. She said it didn't matter, and that she'd be happy with just the 2 of us. But even then, something about the way she said it felt off, like she had already moved on from the idea too quickly. It didn't sit right with me. One minute, she was all about having a family, and the next, she was saying she didn't need kids to be happy. Don't get me wrong. I understand that people can change their minds, but her whole attitude felt off. She went from daydreaming about baby names to completely avoiding any talk about kids. It wasn't just that, though. It felt like she started seeing me differently, too. Out of nowhere, she'd make these little digs at me, things she'd never said before. Comments about how I wasn't taking care of myself, how maybe I should get in shape, or be more productive around the house. Sure, I'd put on a few pounds, but it felt like she was just finding reasons to blame me for things. When I confronted her about the sudden change in attitude, she brushed it off. She'd tell me I was imagining things, that I was being overly sensitive, but I knew something wasn't right. The woman I married, the one who used to sit with me for hours talking about our future, she was different. She wasn't outright mean, but there was this coldness about her, like she'd already checked out mentally and was just going through the motions. Over time, I started to believe her when she said everything was fine. I stopped pushing because I didn't want to come across as insecure or needy. Fast forward a few years, and we were just going through the motions of daily life. We barely talked about anything meaningful. It was like we were more like roommates than husband and wife. I tried bringing up other options, like adoption or surrogacy, but every time, she shut the conversation down. She'd say, I'm happy as long as we're together. But deep down, I never really believed her. It felt like she was trying to convince herself more than she was trying to convince me. Then, out of the blue, she tells me she wants to go on a girls' trip. Now, it wasn't unusual for her to take trips with her friends. She'd done it a few times before, and I always supported her. We lived in Brighton, and she talked for a while about wanting to visit America with her friends. I didn't think twice about it. We had built up trust over the years, so I even helped her pack, made sure she had everything she needed, and dropped her off at the airport. I remember the last thing she said before she left. She turned to me and said, "Thank you for being so supportive." I thought it was a little odd, like I hadn't done anything out of the ordinary, but she seemed so genuine that I brushed it off as her just being appreciative. That night, I stayed up so I could call her when she landed, just to make sure everything had gone smoothly. Her flight was supposed to take about 9 hours, so I kept myself busy around the house, watching TV, checking the clock, and waiting for her text to say she'd landed. When I saw her flight had touched down, I gave her a call to check in. The phone rang and rang, but there was no answer. I figured she was probably exhausted and went straight to her hotel to crash, so I didn't think much of it. But when morning came and I still hadn't heard from her, I started to worry. I started feeling this gnawing worry in the pit of my stomach. I tried calling her again and sent a few texts, thinking maybe she was just busy or her phone was on silent. But as more hours passed with no response, my concern turned into full-blown panic. I called her sister, hoping she'd heard from her, but she hadn't. By now, I was really starting to freak out. Desperate, I even called her friends, the ones she said she'd be traveling with, thinking maybe something had gone wrong with her phone or she hadn't had the chance to check in. But when I got in touch with them, they were just as confused. They weren't on the trip with her. In fact, they were 2 blocks away, sitting at a coffee shop back home. That's when it hit me. She wasn't on a girl's trip. She wasn't with friends. She hadn't gone anywhere with anyone. She was just gone. I sat there holding the phone, feeling like my stomach had dropped through the floor. I couldn't wrap my head around it. Why would she lie to me? Why would she leave without saying anything? At first, I tried convincing myself it was some kind of mistake. Maybe she'd missed a connecting flight or there'd been an emergency and she hadn't been able to call. But deep down, I knew. This had been planned. The whole girl's trip story, her saying thank you for being supportive. It was all part of something she'd been planning in her head. I felt like I was living in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. This wasn't the woman I married. She was someone I didn't even recognize anymore. Suddenly, all the pieces started falling into place. The coldness, her avoidance of conversations about our future, those subtle jabs about my appearance and health. She'd been pulling away for a long time, and I either hadn't noticed or hadn't wanted to see it. That night, I just sat there staring at my phone, hoping for a text, a call, anything. But nothing came. Deep down, I knew it wouldn't. The next morning, I woke up and lay there, staring at the ceiling, hoping it was all just some horrible dream. But her side of the bed was empty, and reality hit me like a ton of bricks. She'd actually left. She packed her bags and vanished, and all the reassurances I'd told myself the night before, that maybe she was delayed or her phone had died, crumbled. It was obvious she'd planned this and wanted out. In those first few days, I was in complete denial. I kept calling her phone, hoping to hear her voice or get an explanation. I left message after message, not even sure what to say half the time, just hoping something would get through to her. But all I got was silence, which somehow made it worse. It felt like she'd left me to figure it all out on my own, as if I'd been a stranger to her all along. At first, her family was just as shocked as I was. Her mom had no idea about her plans and hadn't heard from her either. I ended up going over to their house more times than I could count, talking to her mom and searching for answers. I think they felt sorry for me. Her mom would let me stay the night sometimes, even cooking meals for me when I couldn't bring myself to eat. She'd sit and listen as I talked about all the little things that didn't make sense, trying to piece together how my life had suddenly fallen apart. Some nights, I just sat there in silence, too numb to speak. I swung between extremes, anger, sadness, guilt. I kept asking myself what I'd done wrong. Had I missed some sign? Had I not given her enough attention? I spent countless hours replaying every conversation, every disagreement, trying to figure out what had pushed her to leave. I became consumed by it, obsessing over how I might have saved our marriage or what I could have done differently. I know it sounds dramatic, but I felt like finding an answer was the only way to make sense of it all, as if understanding could somehow fix everything. I barely ate, barely slept, and my work started to suffer. People noticed and would ask if I was okay, but I just shrug it off and say I was dealing with personal stuff. It felt too embarrassing to admit the truth, that my wife had left me without a word. Eventually, I opened up to a couple of close friends. They did their best to keep me distracted, dragging me out to hang out and encouraging me to move on. But even when I was with them, I was stuck in my own head, constantly thinking about her, wondering where she was and why I wasn't enough to make her stay. One of the hardest parts was dealing with the questions from people who didn't know. Neighbors, family, friends, even old coworkers who'd heard I was married would ask, "How's married life?" or "How's your wife?" Every time, it felt like ripping off a fresh scab. I didn't have the courage to tell them she'd left, so I just smile and say, "Everything's fine." But each time I told that lie, it felt heavier. Therapy ended up being the thing that helped the most. I'd never considered it before, but after months of barely functioning, I realized I couldn't handle it alone anymore. I found a therapist and started going weekly, talking to someone neutral, someone who didn't know her, me, or our history, made a difference. In those sessions, I vented about the anger, the betrayal, and the emptiness she left behind. I talked about the sleepless nights spent replaying everything over and over in my mind. The therapist helped me understand that there wasn't some magic moment or action that would have made her stay. She chose to leave, and that was on her, not me. It was a hard truth to accept. For the longest time, I believed something was wrong with me, that I'd somehow driven her away. But slowly, I began to see things differently. She'd been cold and distant for a long time, and I had ignored it, hoping things would somehow fix themselves. But her decision to leave wasn't about me, it was about her. I'd convinced myself that I could hold everything together, that my effort alone was enough to keep our marriage alive. Accepting that it wasn't was a painful realization. As time went on, I began taking small steps to rebuild my life. I hadn't realized how much of myself I'd lost in the marriage until she left. I'd always been the one who made an effort, going out of my way to ensure she was happy and that our home life was comfortable. But now, with all this time on my hands, I didn't know what to do with myself. So, I started revisiting old hobbies I'd forgotten about. I went back to the gym, picked up books I'd been meaning to read, and even experimented with cooking new recipes. Slowly, I began finding joy in these small things. Work improved too. At first, I was just going through the motions, barely keeping up with my tasks. But as I began feeling more like myself again, I put more energy into my job. It became one of the few places where I felt accomplished, where I still had some sense of control. I poured myself into my work, putting in extra hours and focusing on the details, and it paid off. Eventually, I earned a promotion, a milestone I never would have achieved if I'd stayed stuck in self-pity. Still, there were tough days. Every so often, I'd stumble across something that reminded me of her. A photo, an old movie ticket stub, or other small keepsakes tied to our time together. Those moments hurt, stirring up memories I was trying to forget. I'd catch myself wondering what she was doing, if she ever thought about me, or if she regretted what she did. But those moments became less frequent, and each time, I found it a little easier to pack away the memories and move forward. I also reconnected with friends I hadn't seen much of since getting married. We started doing things again, hitting the golf range, going on hikes, and just enjoying each other's company. It felt good to have people in my corner who weren't tied to the mess, who could help me move on without dragging me back into the pain. Slowly but surely, I began reclaiming parts of myself that I thought I'd lost forever. Looking back, I realized I'd poured far too much of myself into that relationship, into being her husband. When she left, it felt like she'd taken a part of me with her, like I'd lost a huge piece of who I was. But, piece by piece, I began finding myself again. It wasn't easy, and it certainly wasn't quick, but I was getting there. By the end of that year, I could finally look in the mirror and see someone who wasn't defined by her leaving. I wasn't just the guy whose wife left him anymore. I had survived, rebuilt, and come out stronger. For the first time in years, I felt like I could live my life without her shadow looming over me. And honestly, I was proud of that. I thought I'd put it all behind me. Life had started to feel normal again, or at least as normal as it could be after everything. I had my routine, friends who kept me busy, and work was going great. I'd even stopped thinking about her every day. Sure, there were still moments when a random memory would creep in, but it wasn't like before, where every second of my life somehow revolved around her. So when I heard a knock on my door one Saturday morning, she was the last person I expected to see standing there. But there she was, on my doorstep, holding a baby. I froze. For a moment, my brain just stopped working. It was like seeing a ghost. She looked almost the same as before, maybe a little more worn down, but still unmistakably her. She gave me this look, like she genuinely thought I'd be happy to see her. And yeah, that hit me hard. I thought I was past caring, but seeing her again stirred up emotions I thought I'd buried for good. I didn't say anything at first. I just stood there, staring, trying to process what was happening. I stood there, staring at her, completely stunned. She flashed me a smile, as if nothing had happened, and without an ounce of shame, she asked, "Can I come in?" The nerve of her. After everything she put me through, she thought she could just walk back into my life like nothing had changed. But I wasn't about to lose my composure. "No," I said firmly. "You can stay right there and explain." I wasn't going to let her into my house, the one I'd worked so hard to rebuild, the one I'd made my own since she left. She looked a little thrown off by my refusal, but she didn't back down. Instead, she launched into her story. "I know this might be a shock," she started, her voice uncertain but trying to sound calm, "but I wanted to come back and explain everything." She had this hopeful look on her face, like she genuinely believed I'd be willing to listen. It was almost laughable. I was torn. Part of me wanted to laugh in her face, and the other part wanted to just shut the door and end it right there. But my curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear her excuse, to know what she had come up with to justify disappearing without a word. She started talking, her voice full of conviction as she went on about how she'd made a mistake by leaving. "I realized I lost the best thing that ever happened to me," she said, her words sharp as she looked at me with what seemed like genuine regret. "I've spent so much time reflecting and having this baby, It's made me see what really matters in life. I tried to hold back my frustration, but the irony wasn't lost on me. Apparently, what truly mattered was showing up unannounced at my doorstep after disappearing for years. I didn't say anything at first, just stared at her, waiting for her to finish. She glanced down at the baby in her arms and then looked up at me, her eyes filled with hope. "This is our second chance," she said softly, as if she was offering me some kind of gift. A second chance? My mind raced. Was she really standing here, holding this child, expecting me to believe that everything could be reset as if none of it had ever happened? As if this baby was some sort of magical reset button that would allow us to pick up where we left off? I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was seething. I didn't interrupt as she continued. "I want us to be a family again. I made a terrible mistake, but now we can start fresh. The three of us, a family again? After everything?" After she'd left me without a word, without a thought, my heart was racing, but I stayed silent, waiting for her to realize how absurd this all sounded. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Why did you leave?" The question had been eating at me since the moment she showed up on my doorstep. I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could feel the tension building in my chest. I had spent years wondering, torturing myself with every possible explanation, and now that she was here, I needed to hear the truth from her. No more guessing. She hesitated, her gaze dropping to her feet like she was ashamed. For a moment, she didn't say anything. It felt like an eternity before she finally looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "I left because I wanted a child," she said, her tone so casual, as if she was talking about something insignificant. "You couldn't give me that, so I found someone who could." I was stunned. Just like that. I couldn't believe how easily she said it, like it wasn't the most painful thing she could have told me. "You walked away from everything we had for that?" She didn't seem to fully understand the gravity of what she had done. "I know it seems harsh, but that's what I needed," she said, almost apologetically, but not enough to sound sorry. "The guy I left with, he didn't stick around. But by then, I had the baby." I clenched my jaw, feeling the heat rise in my chest. This wasn't the answer I had been hoping for. It was worse than I could have imagined. "And then what?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "You think you can just come back now, like everything's okay?" She looked down at the baby in her arms, then back at me, her voice softening. "After everything that happened, I realized, I want you back. I want us to be a family again. Just like that. Simple." She had the baby, and now everything could be fixed. I had no idea what to say. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. I stood there, trying to process what she just told me. Every word she spoke felt like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't let her see how much it was affecting me. She was standing there, admitting she had abandoned me, ran off with another man, had his baby, and now expected me to just forgive it all and act like nothing had happened. As if it was that simple. I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady, and looked her straight in the eye. "So, let me get this straight. You left, found someone else, had his baby, and now you think you can come back and pretend like nothing happened?" Her eyes filled with tears almost immediately, and she started crying. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I made a huge mistake. I didn't know what I was doing. Please, you have to believe me. I want us to be together. I realize now, you're the one I truly love. We were meant to be." Her words hit my ears, but they didn't land the way she hoped. I wasn't moved. Not even a little. I watched her, emotion spilling from her like a broken faucet, but all I could feel was anger and disbelief. "You think you can just walk back in after everything you did?" I asked, my voice low. "You think tears are enough to fix this?" She continued, barely able to catch her breath between sobs. "Please. I've been through so much. I've realized what I lost. I know we belong together. I want to start over. For us. For the baby." I couldn't help but scoff. The whole thing felt surreal. She honestly thought I'd just fall for this? It wasn't love. It was desperation. I could see it all over her face. She was trying to manipulate me into feeling bad for her, but it wasn't going to work. Her tears continued to flow, and she wiped them away with the back of her hand. "It's been so hard being a single mom," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've struggled so much. You don't know what it's like." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "So, that's your excuse?" I asked, barely able to keep the frustration out of my voice. "You're trying to guilt-trip me into coming back because you've had a hard time being a mom?" She looked taken aback by my words, as if she expected more sympathy. "I just thought you'd understand," she said quietly. "We could be a family again." But I was done. I shook my head, not giving her a chance to say more. No, you don't get to just waltz back in and expect me to pick up where we left off. You made your choice, and I'm not going to be your safety net. She kept talking, her voice growing more frantic with each word, trying to make herself out to be the victim in all of this. You don't understand, she said, wiping tears from her eyes. It's been so hard for me, trying to do it all on my own. I just need your support. I'm ready now. I'm ready to make things work this time. The whole time she was speaking, I was wondering who she thought I was. She had made her choices, and now here she was, acting like I owed her something. The more she spoke, the more exhausted I felt, like I was listening to the same broken record I'd heard too many times before. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. You made your choice a long time ago, I said, my voice firm. And now, you have to live with it. There's no second chance here. Her face went pale, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. She took a step back, clearly stunned by my words. It was as if she truly thought I'd just welcome her back into my life, no questions asked, because it was suddenly convenient for her. For a moment, I thought she might just walk away, but then her demeanor changed. Her eyes narrowed, and her voice shifted to something sharper, more accusatory. Selfish, she yelled, her words biting. You're so selfish. You don't even care how hard this has been for me. I deserve a chance to make things right. I stood my ground, refusing to let her manipulate me again, but she wasn't done. Her words became more frantic, more desperate. You owe me this. You owe me the chance to fix everything, she shouted, her face flushed with anger. I could have taken everything from you back then. I could have divorced you and taken half of everything. This house should still be mine. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The nerve of her, bringing up the house like it was some kind of bargaining chip. I shook my head, disbelief mixing with anger. The house isn't yours. It never was, not after what you did. You don't get to claim anything from me now. Her face twisted, her anger clearly boiling over. She was caught up in her own version of reality, expecting me to feel guilty or regretful, but I wasn't going to be swayed. You're not getting anything from me, I said coldly, and I don't owe you a damn thing. As she continued to raise her voice, I realized I was finally seeing her for who she truly was. All the confusion and frustration I'd carried for years started to fade, replaced by a strange sense of relief. This was the person she had become, and I wasn't going to be dragged back into it. I didn't argue or raise my voice. I just looked at her, steady and calm, and said, "We're done. You wanted a different life, and now you have it. This isn't my responsibility anymore." Her face contorted with anger, but I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and shut the door in her face, the sound of her muffled shouts on the other side barely registering. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. She could knock, yell, or cry. It didn't matter. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence sink in. I knew in that instant that she would never be allowed back in. The woman I had loved, the woman I had married, was gone. And in her place was this stranger who thought she could come back whenever it suited her, expecting me to pick up the pieces. But I wasn't going to do that anymore. With one final, resolute breath, I turned away from the door and walked into my house, leaving her behind where she belonged. Part of a past I was finally ready to let go of. I turned away from the door and sank into the chair, feeling lighter than I had in years. I thought that was it, that she'd get the message and leave me alone. But then, I heard it, the banging on the door, followed by her yelling. I couldn't believe her nerve. Here I was, finally in the one place that was mine. The one place I had painstakingly rebuilt after the wreckage she left behind, and she was still demanding that I listen to her. At first, I considered ignoring her, letting her scream herself out until she got tired. But curiosity got the better of me. What kind of excuses would she throw at me this time? So, I opened the door just a crack, enough to show her I was listening, but not enough to let her in. She looked completely stunned, her eyes wide with disbelief, probably shocked that I hadn't reacted the way she expected. She took a moment, clearly trying to process that I wasn't playing along with her usual games. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice shaky. I kept my tone steady. "I'm listening. But this time, I'm not letting you in." She blinked, searching for the words, but all she could manage was a frustrated sigh. She immediately started in, launching into this long speech about how she was willing to forgive me for slamming the door in her face, like it was some small mistake, and how she was ready to start fresh. She acted like we were just in the middle of a regular argument, not addressing the fact that she had abandoned me in the first place. She went on about how we could make things work if we both put in the effort, how we could pick up where we left off. At that moment, I couldn't help it. I laughed. The sheer nerve of this woman was beyond belief. She looked furious when I did that, like I was supposed to feel guilty for not taking her seriously. I wiped the laugh off my face and said, "You left. You had your chance, and you threw it all away. I'm not going to pretend none of that happened just because you feel like it." Her face went bright red, and she immediately fired back. "You don't understand how hard it was for me." She started rambling about how lost she had been after leaving, how she thought she knew what she wanted but had realized too late that she'd made a mistake. I wasn't buying any of it. I stared at her, calm but firm, and said, "Leaving was a choice you made. You planned it, you lied about it, and you went through with it. Your regret doesn't mean anything now." She looked at me, her eyes wide, as if she couldn't believe I wasn't backing down. But I had nothing left to give her. That's when she snapped. Her whole tone shifted in an instant. The sad, remorseful act she'd been putting on completely dropped, and the anger came pouring out. She started accusing me of being unfair, of not having the decency to give her another chance. Her voice got louder as she went on, and then she hit me with it. "If I'd wanted to, I could have taken everything from you back then. I could have taken half of everything you own." I stood there, stunned, trying to process what she was saying. This woman, the one who had left me without a word, now thought she deserved some kind of reward for not trying to ruin me financially. As if I should be grateful she hadn't been as terrible as she could have been. I couldn't believe it. I looked at her, my voice steady but dripping with disbelief. "So what, am I supposed to be grateful? Grateful that you ditched me and didn't take my stuff with you?" She didn't even have a response to that. For a second, we just stood there, the weight of her words hanging in the air. But I wasn't going to let it slide. I wasn't going to be manipulated by guilt or some warped sense of entitlement. I was done. She stared at me, her face a mix of anger and something else, desperation, guilt, maybe both. But honestly, at that point, I didn't care. I was done. All those years I spent feeling guilty, questioning myself, wondering if I was somehow responsible for her leaving. They melted away in that moment. I finally saw her for who she truly was, and it felt like a weight had been lifted off me. But she wasn't done. She started pacing on my porch, her voice rising as she went off about how I'd never find anyone like her. "You'll regret this," she said, her words sharp. "You'll never find someone who understands you like I do. You're making a huge mistake." I shook my head, not sure if I should laugh or be angry. "I hope I never find anyone else like you." "Damn you," she shot back, hands flailing in frustration. "You'll see. One day, you'll realize that you let the best thing in your life slip away." It was bizarre. Here she was, the one who had destroyed everything we had, acting like I should be begging her to stay. She was the one who left, the one who shattered our life, and now she was trying to flip the script on me. The nerve of her. I crossed my arms, standing firm. "I didn't destroy anything. You did that all on your own." She stopped pacing for a second, almost like she was thrown off by my response, but then she started again, trying to spin it like I was the one who was being unreasonable. But there was no changing my mind. I was done playing along with her games. When she saw I wasn't budging, she got louder, claiming that I'd forced her to leave in the first place. She said that if I'd been more understanding about the whole kid situation, none of this would have happened. According to her, my inability to give her a child meant I had failed her as a husband, which somehow justified her running off to have one with someone else. The mental gymnastics were impressive. Honestly, I couldn't believe she was trying to pin her choices on me. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "If you wanted a kid that badly, you could have told me the truth. You didn't have to lie to my face and pretend everything was fine while planning your escape." She just stood there, frozen, staring at me like I'd slapped her. But I wasn't about to let her get a word in. I pressed on. "You made that choice on your own, and now you have to live with it. That's not my problem." Her face shifted again, and she switched tactics. The sad, remorseful act came back as she held the child closer to her chest. "Please," she begged, her voice soft, "think about him. He needs you. He deserves a family." I couldn't believe she was trying this one last guilt trip, using the child as some kind of weapon to make me feel responsible. But I wasn't having it. I stepped forward, my voice firm. "I don't know that child. I have nothing to do with him. He's not mine, and neither are you." Her face fell, the sad facade crumbling, and I could see the desperation in her eyes. But there was no turning back now. I wasn't falling for it. That was it. I could see the realization hit her. She knew I wasn't going to change my mind, that I wasn't going to let her back into my life. I saw the anger fade, replaced by something else. Maybe regret, maybe frustration, but it didn't matter anymore. She was just a stranger now, a stranger who had tried to walk all over me and thought I would just smile and thank her for it. She stood there for a few more seconds, like she was waiting for me to change my mind, to call her back. But I didn't say another word. I just watched her face as it finally dawned on her that I meant every word. Without saying anything more, I shut the door, and this time, I didn't wait for her to bang on it again. I knew deep down I had made my decision, and there was no going back. I walked away from the door, feeling, I don't know, like I'd finally won. She had spent so much time thinking she could come back and manipulate her way into my life. But it was over. I was free. There wasn't going to be a second chance. Not for her, not for us. She was just a memory now. One I had finally put in the past where it belonged. After all those years of guilt and pain, I finally felt like I could breathe again. And you know what? It felt good. The moment I closed that door on her, a strange calm washed over me. I wasn't angry, sad, or even shocked anymore. It was like every ounce of energy I'd spent on her, all the regret, the guilt, the endless wondering, just disappeared. I'd finally gotten the closure I didn't even know I needed, and I was ready to move on. It was over, for real, this time. But of course, things didn't end as cleanly as I had hoped. A few days later, I got a text from her mom. She was apologizing, saying she was ashamed of how her daughter had handled everything, and that she had tried to talk some sense into her, but clearly, it hadn't worked. Her mom was a good person. She'd helped me out a lot after her daughter left, and I could tell she was genuinely upset about everything. I didn't hold anything against her, but I wasn't interested in getting roped back into that mess. I simply replied with a polite thanks for checking in and left it at that. I wasn't about to give her mom any more details or waste time explaining my decision. She understood enough to know it was over. Over the next few weeks, I heard bits and pieces through mutual friends and social media. Apparently, she'd gone back to living with her parents, and it wasn't going smoothly. The guy she'd left me for, the father of the kid, had completely bailed. He hadn't signed up for the long haul, and now she was left trying to figure things out on her own. She had pretty much burned every bridge, and there weren't many people willing to lend a hand. Her old friends, the ones who had supported me when she first disappeared, had no sympathy for her. They'd all moved on and weren't eager to get dragged back into her drama. I couldn't blame them. Her parents weren't thrilled either. They weren't in a great financial position to support her and the baby. I knew this because, not long after receiving the text from her mom, I got a call from her dad. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the best of me. He was polite but direct. He mentioned they were struggling to make ends meet and hinted that maybe I could help out a little. He said, "We know you cared about her once," and kept going on about the baby and how hard things were for them. I listened politely, but when he started talking about how his daughter just needed a little support to get back on her feet, I couldn't help but chuckle, quietly of course. I told him as kindly as I could that his daughter's choices were her own, and I wasn't in a position, or mindset, to help. I think he got the message, because he didn't press the matter any further. Then her friends started reaching out, people I hadn't heard from in years. A few tried the guilt trip, saying she was going through a tough time and maybe I could find it in my heart to give her another chance. One friend even had the nerve to suggest that the kid needed a father figure and that I shouldn't let my bitterness stand in the way of helping him. But I stood firm. I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel guilty for finally choosing myself after years of feeling like I wasn't enough. I had given that woman everything, and she threw it away. The least she could do was on her decisions instead of expecting me to bail her out. Over time, the calls and messages slowed down and eventually stopped altogether. It was like everyone finally realized I was serious, that I had moved on and wasn't going to get pulled back in. That's when the real peace settled in. My life felt calm, normal, in a way it hadn't in years. I had my routines, my friends, my work. It wasn't a glamorous life, but it was mine, and I had rebuilt it on my terms. The funny thing is, I started finding happiness in the little things again, things I hadn't really noticed when I was married. I'd go for walks, cook my own meals, read books I'd meant to get to for years. The freedom was refreshing, and I realized I didn't need anyone's permission to live the way I wanted. For once, I wasn't constantly worried about someone else's approval or happiness. It was like I'd gotten my life back, piece by piece. Every now and then, I'd run into someone who knew both of us, and they'd ask, "Hey, whatever happened with her?" I'd give a brief, polite answer and change the subject. It wasn't that I was hiding anything. I just didn't want to keep revisiting a chapter that was clearly over. She was part of my past, and I had finally learned how to leave her there. As for her, the last I heard, things weren't going well. She was struggling to keep a job, still bouncing between her parents' place and friends' couches when she wore out her welcome. People I barely talked to anymore would message me occasionally, telling me she was asking for help from just about anyone who'd listen. Some of them even hinted that she was hoping I'd change my mind, that maybe I'd come around and decide to play the dad to her kid after all. But that wasn't going to happen. I'd spent too much time and energy getting my life back to even think about going down that road. I wasn't going to be her safety net, and I wasn't going to be the guy who picks up the pieces just because things didn't go the way she planned. I was done with that chapter, and nothing was going to pull me back in. In the end, I felt like I got the closure I needed. She had made her choices, and now she was facing the consequences. As for me, I finally felt free, truly, genuinely free. In a way I hadn't since the day she left. I was done letting her shadow loom over my life. I had moved on, and I was content. Not happy in some grand, dramatic way, but quietly and peacefully content. And you know what? That was enough. It wasn't something I expected, but life has a way of surprising you when you least anticipate it. A few months after I had truly let go of everything related to her, I started to notice a shift in my own life. I was out one evening with some friends, just catching up over drinks, when I met Mia. She wasn't anything like I had expected. She was calm, kind, and easy to talk to, with no hidden agendas or past baggage. It wasn't love at first sight, but there was something about her that made me want to get to know her better. We started seeing each other casually at first, just dinners, walks, and movies. And for the first time in a long while, I felt something other than the quiet peace I had come to enjoy. It was like rediscovering joy in the little things again. Mia didn't rush anything, and she made me feel safe, like I could truly be myself without fear of judgment. With her, I could just be, and that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. As we spent more time together, it became clear that she was someone I could see a future with. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was the comfort of knowing she was there, a partner who understood me without trying to fix me or change me. We were a team, and it felt right. A year passed, and I found myself thinking about the future. Mia and I had built something real, something that felt genuine, without the complications or misunderstandings that had plagued my past. One evening, under the soft glow of the setting sun, I proposed to her. She said yes, and just like that, I knew I was ready to take this step forward with her. I was about to get married again, but this time, it was different. This wasn't about healing wounds or fixing mistakes. It was about two people choosing to build something beautiful from the ground up, together. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.